I followed them to the park, the place of their secret rendezvous. Watching from the shadows, I saw their guilt, their fear. Confronting them under the stormy sky, I revealed their sins. The evidence was undeniable, their lives shattered before my eyes, but I felt no pity. I turned away, leaving behind a broken woman and a terrified lover. This was my retribution. Tim discovers that his wife, Karen, has been unfaithful to him with several partners. She believed she needed excitement in her life. This leads to a serious situation where Tim's actions put her and her lovers at risk. Tim decides to hire a lawyer for a divorce. Karen wishes to improve their marriage and return to Tim, but Tim has clear proof of her cheating and feels far from forgiving her. He files for divorce and seeks to gain full custody of their children, getting temporary custody while the divorce is underway. One of Karen's lovers attacks Tim, leaving him in the hospital. Unfortunately, even there, Tim isn't safe, and someone tries to poison him. Tim tries to find out who wants to harm him, but he does not succeed. The sheriff, however, is taken by the Rangers for questioning. Randy and Tim both give statements to the Rangers. Then Randy takes Tim to a safe place, letting worried lawyers know they are okay. Randy leaves to talk to his wife about something hard in their marriage. Andy and Patty invite him into an office to talk privately. Meanwhile, Jimmy asks Tim to meet him in the kitchen, take Tim's small bag to his room, and continue cooking. Jimmy listens as Tim shares what happened that day. Jimmy shakes his head in disbelief at the chaos that unfolded. Suddenly, a cheerful voice comes from the door. A lovely science teacher walks in, dressed for work. She asks about the sheriff's car outside. With excitement, Tim jumps out from behind the door. The teacher shrieks in surprise, but then happily hugs Tim when she sees him. She goes on about how good it is to see him up and about. Tim praises her dress, recalling the last time he saw her in something different. The playful teasing continues, and they all share a laugh. Jeannie, the teacher, feels shy as the compliments make her cheeks flush. Tim suggests she should dress nicely for dinner. Jeannie frowns but is encouraged by Patty, who supports the idea. The women leave the room together, and the men watch them go. Jimmy warns the group that they might be in trouble now since Patty loves a challenge. He asks Randy to invite his wife over for dinner, believing that a nice meal could help smooth things over in their relationship. However, Randy hesitates, saying he and his wife have some issues to resolve. Ellen, another friend, thinks sharing a meal could ease their talk. They discuss whether Randy should leave his patrol car here or bring it back later. After some thought, Randy decides to call his wife and ask her to come over for dinner. Once Randy goes to make the call, Tim turns to Alan and explains that Randy's situation is tricky. He believes that if Randy's wife admits to the truth, they might be able to save their marriage. Sadly, Tim thinks about his own marriage and how he doesn't have the same chance. He feels certain he is heading towards divorce and likely a struggle for custody of his children. Tim felt lost without the person he thought he would grow old with, and the idea of visiting his sons seemed impossible unless he caused a lot of pain to his wife. There didn't seem to be any good way to fix things. He couldn't change his bandages with one hand, so Tim settled for shaving and cleaning himself with a washcloth. He put on tan slacks and a green sweater before joining 3 men in the kitchen. He accepted a cold beer, and while the beef bourguignon was ready, the women were still busy. They chatted together as they waited. When the doorbell rang, Randy started to get it, but Jimmy said he should go. When Randy came back, he had a beautiful woman with him. She was about 5'9", with long hair, an olive skin tone, and bright blue eyes. She wore jeans and high heels. Tim felt a warm feeling for her because she seemed so young and innocent, and he hoped she wasn't as hurt as he feared. He hoped she was tricked and didn't enjoy what happened, just like his wife. The thought of her softened his heart, but also made him want to find the people who hurt her and stop them soon. When he was introduced to the woman, he noticed she tensed up and looked down, realizing she probably connected him to what his wife had done. He greeted her warmly and gave her a light hug, trying to hide his own pain. When she moved back, she appeared more relaxed, maybe thinking he didn't know. Still, she looked nervous as she stayed next to Randy, who smiled at her, but Tim could see his struggle too. Then Patty and Jeannie entered and broke the tension in the kitchen. They were also dressed nicely. Wearing tight jeans and matching sweaters, they rushed to welcome the new woman, complimented her, and asked about her kids. The conversation became lively as she talked about her 2 daughters. Tim gently pulled on Randy's sleeve and led him towards the living room. "I can see how tense you are, and I know your wife can too," he said. "Let me share some advice that is worth listening to. Trust her. Yes, she made a mistake by not telling you, but I believe she really loves you." He explained that Karen did what the sheriff told her with sadness and tears. "You should hear her story. Judge it like you would with anyone else. If you believe her, forgive her. Make sure she can tell you everything that's on her mind. You both need to rebuild that trust." Randy looked unsure, but he promised Tim he would give her a chance to explain before making any choices. They went back into the kitchen, Tim's hand on Randy's shoulder, and Jennifer's worried look faded. She joined the conversation again. Master Chef Jock announced dinner was ready, and everyone took their seats. Tim sat next to Jeannie, and the meal was delicious. Patty's apple tart tatin for dessert was amazing. Everyone except Randy and Tim had some wine and seemed happy. Randy wasn't drinking because he needed to drive his wife home and discuss something serious that would affect them and their children. Tim wasn't drinking either because his doctors warned against mixing alcohol and pain meds, and he wanted to stay sharp during this tough time. They were still talking when suddenly they heard gunfire. Randy shouted for the women to get on the floor and hide in the pantry. He pulled out his gun and told the other men to do the same if they had weapons. Tim crawled to the closet where he kept a rifle, shotgun, pistol, and ammo bag. As he crawled back, pushing the shotgun and ammo in front of him, he heard bullets shatter the glass front door and the kitchen windows. Jimmy, who had gone to the pantry for his shotgun, discovered the women had fled to the cellar for safety. Tim handed the shotgun to Alan to cover the area where the dining room met the living room, giving him a view of both the kitchen and front door. He shouted for Jimmy to check the back door, which was locked and had an alarm. Just then, they saw a flash of a gun and heard more bullets hit the kitchen windows. Tim fired back at the flashes with his rifle while Randy used his pistol. Then, Tim noticed someone trying to force the front door open and fired twice at it. Hearing a yelp, he fired 2 more times, staying alert and ready, but the gunfire stopped. Randy grabbed his handheld radio and called for backup, and soon they heard sirens. He updated the situation, and before long, spotlights began moving across the yard, followed by a knock at the door. Randy went to answer it, his gun still in its holster. Tim was ready with his rifle just in case the 2 police officers from the local department came in. They talked to Randy, and then 2 more officers came through the side door into the kitchen. Tim put his rifle down on the floor and stood up, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. Alan did the same with his shotgun. The women came out from the pantry, surprising the officers. Tim quickly explained that the women had been in the pantry since the shooting started, and the police apologized for pointing their guns at them. The women smiled back and thanked the officers for coming so fast to help. A security guard had been shot. Thankfully, it wasn't life-threatening, but he was an off-duty cop, and the police were not happy about it. Tim knew this would make the search for the shooter even more serious, so he stepped aside, thinking about whether he wanted the criminals caught or taken down himself. Jimmy returned from the back holding his shotgun, causing a bit of a commotion, but Randy calmed everyone down and the detective who had arrived gathered everyone in the living room. They were asked to explain what happened. Their lawyers, Patty and Alan, shared the story. They mentioned that Randy brought Tim from the hospital and that Tim was asked to stay for dinner. The detective looked worried and asked Randy if they were the targets in an attempted murder that happened earlier that day. Randy confirmed that they were. The detective pressed further. "So, these people really want to take you out, don't they? Do you know who they are?" Everyone looked at Tim, who was watching his 3 lawyers carefully. "Shouldn't one of you speak up?" the detective asked. Alan replied, saying Tim was the best person to answer. Tim gave a brief summary of everything that had happened since the blizzard, leaving out anything about Jennifer's past. When he mentioned the films Karen was in, he watched Karen carefully. Jennifer became pale and wobbly and looked at her husband. He put his arm around her, but his eyes stayed on Tim. The group shared their story and they answered questions. The tired crowd said goodbye to the officers and welcomed the guards to use the kitchen door for breaks. Jimmy gave one of them a key, and they returned to the living room. Jennifer called their neighbor, who was babysitting for her. The neighbor agreed to keep their kids overnight. Alan decided to stay at the house too, leaving one bedroom empty for the Jacksons. Jimmy offered to show them their room. Randy followed him, and Alan, Jeannie, and Patty went to their own rooms. Tim stepped back and signaled for Jennifer to come over. She looked scared as she watched her husband walk away. "I think you figured out I'm Karen's husband, but I have no bad intentions, Jennifer. Tonight and tomorrow are very important for you. Be honest with Randy and answer every question he has completely. If you do, things will go well," Tim urged her. She looked like she might cry as she softly said, "If I do, he will leave me. He can't ever know what happened." "Jennifer, he's a cop. He knows more than you realize. Please, just be honest," Tim whispered urgently. He took her arm and led her to their assigned bedroom before turning to his. He watched her go in nervously and wished someone could have talked to his wife when she faced similar problems. Saturday morning came with the smell of bacon and biscuits. Tim woke to see a smiling blonde bouncing toward him. "Wake up, sleepyhead! Breakfast is getting cold!" Tim threw back the sheets and got out of bed without thinking. He only realized he was naked when he saw her expression. Too late now, he thought, as he walked to the bathroom. He glanced back and saw Jeannie staring at him. He grinned and asked, "Like what you see?" She turned bright red and hurried away from the door. As Tim entered the kitchen, everyone laughed. Jeannie blushed again as Patty teased, "What did you do to this sweet girl, you pervert?" Jeannie had been blushing ever since she woke him up. That made everyone laugh even louder. Tim shrugged. "Me? I was sleeping when someone told me to get up. I did as I was told and went to the bathroom. Jeannie was staring at me from the moment I kicked the covers off until I escaped." Randy, Jennifer, Alan, Patty, and Jimmy burst into laughter while Jeannie looked even more embarrassed. She stammered, "I didn't know you'd be sleeping naked." The laughter grew, with Tim mockingly saying, "A lady wouldn't look at me like that. You were quite obvious." Jeannie hid her face on the table while the others continued to laugh. "I'm totally embarrassed," Tim joked, and Jennifer took a sip of her coffee and said, "Well, you don't have anything to be embarrassed about, but I didn't see you naked." That made everyone laugh again. Tim smiled and gave Jeannie a friendly kiss on top of her head. "Just remember, turnabout is fair play," he joked as she turned red again while heading to the coffee pot. Breakfast was scrambled eggs, bacon, and homemade biscuits with butter and peach preserves. "Someone knows what I like," Tim said as he piled food onto his plate. "It's that creeper," Patty chimed in. She got up to make coffee, set the table, and prepare a meal. She started cooking when she thought you would wake up. Then she went to get you because the rest of us are really hungry. Or maybe she just wanted to see you in the morning without your clothes. Jeannie turned red and realized that the teasing would keep going until she did something back. She got up, walked over to Tim, who was loading his plate, playfully slapped him on the back, smiled at him, and said, "Nice, big guy." Tim pretended to be grossed out. "A piece of meat, that's all I am to you. Just a pretty face. You should know I have a brain up here with eyes, and I expect you to look up here and not just at my body," he said. Everyone laughed loudly. Jeannie playfully slapped him again and walked back to the table with a sway in her step. "Stop staring at my backside, you pig. If I can't look, neither can you," Randy said, copying what his kids say. The laughter grew again. Jeannie moved her hips and took a seat next to Tim. Tim walked over, pulled out her chair, poked her shoulder, and wiggled his backside in front of her. When she turned towards him, he sat down and began eating with a serious face. "You two are funny. You must really know each other to tease like that," Jennifer said with a laugh. Tim was happy to see her lively this morning and noticed Randy smiling at her when she joked. "Looks like someone is going to have a good day." Shame his marriage was not the same. The conversation was easy and light during breakfast. After the second pot of coffee, Jeannie said, "My parents and my sister Kathy are coming over soon. They want to meet everyone before we head out shopping." "They should be here soon. Can you stay until they arrive?" Jeannie asked. "We will. We're waiting for the repairman," Patty replied. Tim and the Jacksons nodded. After some silent agreement, like a married couple would share, Alan glanced at his watch. "I need to leave soon," he said. Jeannie touched his arm and said, "Please stay. I want you to meet my older sister. She's feeling lonely after her divorce last year." Tim joked, "Looks like a setup." The group laughed again. Alan smiled and shook his head. He told Jeannie, "If your sister looks anything like you, I will definitely be interested." "Well, she's taller and prettier, but she's still upset about men since her husband left her for his secretary. So we both have our stories," Jeannie explained. "This should be interesting," Jimmy said while snorting. "Wait, if she's divorced and prettier than you, why not set her up with me? I'm nearly divorced too. My wife's friends are after me every day. I bet her story isn't worse than mine. We might be a perfect match," Tim joked with a serious face. Jeannie shot him a look that could hurt. "You are not free, and maybe you never will be," she said. "Alan, can you be free?" Tim asked. "Yes," Alan responded. "I filed for divorce. My lawyer says it'll be quick. I should be free in a few weeks." Everyone around the table tried to hold back their laughter. Getting into the fun, Jeannie tossed her hair and looked down at Tim, saying, "Remember the girl in the blue dress who skipped other offers just to be with you at the hospital? You made promises to her that you haven't kept, so you are not free yet. Maybe after she tries you out and decides to move on, then I'll think about introducing her to my sister, if Alan hasn't already taken her." The group laughed hard at that, and Tim looked like he had given up. "After tonight, I'm going back home. Actually, I have a nice cabin at my ranch up on a hill." Alan tried to speak, but Tim went on. "It's a mile from the county road with 2 locked gates. I'll take my brother with me. He trains guard dogs. I'll be well prepared and far away from everyone else, so no one gets hurt because of me. My wife and kids, even her parents, are at risk. I can't put everyone else in danger anymore. You promised to help, Tim. That is why you got out. If you don't, you might never use your arm or leg fully again. Please stay here with us. The police will protect us," Jeannie begged. Tim turned towards her, held her hands, and continued. "There's a good therapist down there, too. I know how to do all the exercises already. I've thought a lot about this and spoke with someone I trust last night. They won't stop trying, and people could get hurt. My family, my friends, maybe you could get hurt. I can't live with that. I have family and friends who know the woods well. Some have military training, and they are great marksmen. Everyone knows who I am, and new faces stand out enough that people notice them. Once I tell my story, there will be about 4,000 people watching for me and looking for 5 spots. Trust me, we will all feel safer when I am down there. But that doesn't mean everyone will be completely safe. Some people still want to hurt you, or at least make your life hard. And when I go missing, they might take one of my friends to find out where I went. Randy and Jennifer are still in danger because of the crooked sheriff. The more I learn, the more I think there are powerful people involved that we don't know about. Karen will be asked questions by 2 Texas Rangers and a senior state officer about anyone she might have seen or heard about. These same officers will also talk to others who might know something, including people from the Williamson County Sheriff's Department. While I stay alone, I plan to watch some movies that might help me learn more. I'll stay in touch with Ranger Boyd by phone and radio, and we will keep each other updated. We need to finish this quickly. I don't like being an easy target, and I definitely don't want to put others at risk, especially the people at this table. This is the best plan. And yes, I will have very good protection and be armed. They won't be in a marked car, but they will be ready and watchful." Jeannie started to protest again, but Randy stopped her. "He's right. We can't keep him safe here like we can in a rural area. He and the Rangers made this plan, and I think it's the best choice. If he stays here and we don't catch them, they will eventually be able to take him down. He will be with people he knows well, and I know he has good friends who will do anything for him because they care about him. It isn't a perfect plan, but it's much better than staying here as a sitting duck." Jeannie looked unsure and disappointed, wanting to argue. But then the doorbell rang. "Oh no, it's my family. Go get ready," Patty said. "We will let them in, say hello, and keep them busy while you get ready." Jeannie hurried back to her bedroom. The group greeted her family at the door, which was now open because the workmen were replacing it. The Hildebrand family was a good-looking couple in their 40s, along with a strong red-haired woman in her 20s. You could tell Jeannie got her looks from her mom, Amelia, who was 5 feet 4 inches tall, charming, and beautiful. Her dad, Joe, was over 6 feet tall and lean, with short hair and a military-like straight posture. Kathy, Jeannie's sister, looked a lot like her mom, but taller, around 5 feet 6 or 7, bustier, with red hair instead of blonde. Both Amelia and Kathy wore stylish jeans and sweaters, while Joe dressed in khakis and a polo shirt. Jimmy introduced everyone, and Tim was introduced last. As they introduced themselves, her family seemed warm and friendly, just as you would expect from people from San Antonio. But when Tim was introduced, their warm welcomes quickly turned to hugs and kisses, thanking him for looking out for their daughter. He quickly said it wasn't just him, but that everyone, especially Jimmy and Patty, helped Jeannie in leaving her abusive husband. She was the brave one. Mom looked at Tim and firmly stated that Jeannie had told them a very different story, and they believed her. She smiled and hugged Tim, giving him kisses on the cheek and softly patting his other cheek before thanking everyone else. Noticing that Jeannie was still not there, she teased, "So our youngest daughter isn't ready yet. How strange, right?" Her husband and daughter laughed. The others looked confused. Kathy noticed their puzzled faces and explained, "You look confused. Jeannie always dressed in the latest styles and looked perfect wherever she went. She was always late. I swear she even looked flawless in sports, but every date had to wait at least 15 minutes for her grand entrance. We called her Princess Jeannie. Is she still like that?" Patty looked at the others and said, "No, not at all. She dresses simply, wears little makeup, and is always ready when we are. The only reason she isn't ready now is that we had a late breakfast and talked a bit too long." "Tim, you work with her. What do you think?" "She's the most kind, caring, and down-to-earth person I know," Tim replied, a little defensive. "I've seen her dressed up, so I know how beautiful she can be, but that was once in almost 2 years. Most of the time, she's been casually dressed with little makeup and has a nice hairstyle for a teacher and dance coach. She's been more like the all-American girl than a princess around me." Kathy looked shocked. Mom seemed to think Jeannie had tricked him, while Dad beamed with pride. "See? I told you she had grown up," Dad said. "Oh, Dad, she's always been your little princess," Kathy said with a hint of envy. Just then, Jeannie appeared, looking delighted to see her family. She wore a navy jumpsuit with 3/4 sleeves that zipped in the front and comfortable athletic shoes. Her hair was clean and tidy, and her only jewelry was a simple heart necklace and matching earrings. The jumpsuit fit her well, showing off her curves, and her hairstyle framed her beautiful face. The light makeup made her bright green eyes look even bigger, but she didn't seem as spoiled as her sister or mother. The three women hugged, kissed, and complimented each other. Then Jeannie stepped away to her dad, who looked so happy to see his little girl. Tim thought maybe she did get extra love and praise growing up. He smiled at their happiness and admired how she looked. As Jeannie stood on her tiptoes to hug her dad, Patty told Mom Hildebrand that they were expecting them for dinner. She added that Jimmy and Tim would be grilling steak, shrimp, and different kinds of vegetables, followed by her famous chocolate sheet cake with pecans. Mom promised to come back for dinner and asked what time. Patty said any time was fine, just let them know so they could get ready. Jeannie turned back to her family and told Patty and Jimmy they would return by 4:30. She told the Jacksons she liked meeting them and hoped to see them again. She asked Alan if he could join them to show them some of the new stores he mentioned, even though they had already talked about this. Alan blushed. Kathy smiled at her little sister, knowing this was a plan, but she liked Alan and didn't mind. Jeannie cheerfully led her family and Alan to the car, but then she remembered her purse was inside and ran back to the door. She quickly grabbed her purse off the chair and gave him a teasing look. "You better be here when I get back or I'll find you, mister," she said playfully, before giving his cheek a gentle touch and hinting at a kiss. With that, she laughed and ran back to the car. He got some playful teasing from Jennifer and Randy about their friendship, but their parents covered their eyes as if they hadn't seen anything. The Jacksons had to go, but they promised to stay in touch. They waved for Tim to come out, where Randy put his arm around Tim's shoulders and Jennifer hugged his waist. "We want to thank you for the good advice you gave us yesterday," Randy started. "I understand how you must feel. I was really upset. But after hearing my little West Texas girl, I realized she didn't have the knowledge to take on the sheriff. I need to help her more. She's too pretty, and she will always attract men, even the bad ones. We want to keep you in our lives. You've become someone I trust and count on." Jennifer hugged him tightly, which hurt his injured hip, but he hugged her back anyway. "Thank you, Tim. I was scared when I heard your name yesterday, but you've become my best friend in the world, besides Randy." She softened her hug and looked into his eyes, which were full of emotion. There are some things I need to share. I know Karen was pressured into making those films just like I was. However, by the time I got involved, she seemed to be in control. She told me she was leaving after this movie to focus on being the best wife and mom because she really cares about you and your sons. She meant it, and I could hear it in her voice. But then, when the filming began, she became a star again. They changed the script to one where I was hurt because I could only cry. I hated those men. I could hurt every one of them. Karen was different. She was nice and understanding. I didn't enjoy it except when I was with her. I don't usually feel that way about women, but with her, it was exciting. I know she wants to go back to being a mother and wife, but can she really stop being with other people? There were others besides me. She claims she only had a few days of that life, but she acted like she had done it all before. I see the pain in your eyes, and I'm really sorry. I owe my new start with Randy to you. I just hope she doesn't hurt you again. You can call us any time if you need anything, okay? The rest of the day was a blur. There were workers all around. Jimmy and Patty were guiding them with repairs and updates, like adding deadbolts and improving the security system. Tim stayed busy by chopping wood for the fire pits and preparing the outdoor area. As he lit the fires at 3:45, he thought about decisions he needed to share later that evening. Kathy held Alan's arm as they walked into the backyard, following her parents to where Tim was getting ready to cook the steaks. "Son, Jeannie told us everything over lunch," she said. "Thank you so much for helping her decide to leave Larry and for taking care of our little girl while she healed." Tim, feeling a bit shy, said, "Your daughter did so much for me when I was hurt. She took better care of me than I did for her. I need to thank her and also her family for raising such a kind person," he added. Just then, Jimmy walked over with grilled vegetables. Mr. Hildebrand asked him what really happened last night. "We saw the repairmen when we arrived, and some are still here, but Jeannie was hiding, so she doesn't know what happened." "When we asked Alan, he said to ask you. So what happened?" Jimmy started to share the story of the day before. He talked about Tim leaving the hospital, the sheriff getting involved, planning with the Rangers and DPS, and the trap set for the bad guys, which led to the shootout last night. Tim was mentioned as a hero throughout the story, and Jeannie's parents began to see him in a different light. "You have a very exciting life as a teacher, don't you?" Jeannie's mom said. "I can't believe all this happens to you," her dad added. "Why would anyone want to hurt you?" Tim replied, "This doesn't make sense to me either. I'll let my lawyers look over my time with you so I don't say something I shouldn't. Jimmy, you can share as much as you want." "I don't want to hide anything from Jeannie's family. Just tell me how you like your steaks, and then let's move to the patio. I don't want to hear about it again." Jeannie went to sit on the patio with her family. Jimmy and Alan shared the messy story while Patty gathered what was needed for the meal and brought it to the big table on the patio, sometimes adding her own details. Tim focused on cooking the veggies and steaks for the Hildebrand family. Joe wanted his steak medium, while the three women asked for theirs well done. Tim kept an eye on everything, and Frost joked, "I'll cook them until they are done, then give you the tongs so you can burn them yourself. I won't ruin a good steak by cooking it well done." Joe laughed and said, "See, I've told you." Kathy rolled her eyes but agreed to try a properly cooked steak with the promise that she would burn it herself if she didn't like it. Jeannie and Amelia also agreed to give it a shot, and Tim went back to cooking. The other three men wanted medium rare, while Patty wanted medium, so Tim timed everything perfectly. As everyone finished cooking, they picked up their steaks and added the veggies to their plates. Since the Hildebrand family was driving back to San Antonio, they chose tea, sweet or unsweet, served in tall glasses filled with ice. Even though there was no alcohol, Kathy made a face when she cut into her steak. "It's so juicy!" Tim looked at her with some surprise and said, "Of course it is. Haven't you heard the saying, a big juicy steak? Nobody wants a big dry one, do they? Try it. If you don't like it, the tongs are right on the pit." He glanced at Jeannie and her mom, both of whom quickly agreed to try the steak. Everyone watched closely as each person cut into their steak and took a bite. Amelia was the first to respond. She looked amazed and said, "Wow, I had no idea a steak could taste this good. "What did you do, Tim?" He smiled and replied, "I seasoned it with my special spices, cooked it to medium, and put it on your plate." "Medium?" she asked, her eyes wide. "Yes, everyone who wanted medium well got a steak with a warm pink center, keeping the juices inside without any blood," Tim explained. Jeannie asked Kathy how her steak was cooked. Kathy replied, "It was perfect until you told me. I thought it was just medium." She looked shocked at eating a steak that wasn't well done. Tim turned to Jeannie, who smiled sweetly and said, "It's perfect, Tim. The best I've ever had. Thank you for teaching us something new about steak today." Tim noticed the curious look from Papa Joe before the topic changed, and everyone started eating again. The conversation remained lively during the meal, and no one wanted it to end. As the hours went by and the evening cooled down, they moved into the living room to keep talking. The Hildebrands brought 2 bottles of fine wine as gifts for their hosts, and they decided that everyone should have a drink before heading back home. Tim thanked them but opted for a cold Lone Star beer. "Wasting good wine on my simple taste is just wrong," he said. After the first drink, a second was poured when the doorbell rang. Jimmy grabbed his new pistol from under the counter by the door. Alan and Tim took positions by the door, standing on either side of the hallway. They opened the closet doors, stepped inside, and carefully lifted their hidden rifles. Jimmy peeked out, nodded at the 2 men, and opened the door. Tim glanced back into the living room and saw Mr. Hildebrand watching closely while the women chatted. Ranger Jim Boyd stepped inside. He smiled at Alan and Tim, but quickly got serious and said he had important news for everyone. They invited him to join them in the living room where everyone was now paying attention. After introductions, Jim paused, unsure if he should continue in front of Jeannie's parents. Tim encouraged him to share because they had already heard part of the story and should hear this too. Jim agreed and shared news that surprised everyone. "We caught one of the men from last night. The shout you heard when Tim fired came from a bullet that cut deeply into his side, and he needed medical help. The police informed us. This man wasn't one we were looking for, but his story sounded strange. So we questioned him about how he got shot. He was saying he was in pain, but nobody could find his pain medication. Eventually, he broke down and told us what happened, and luckily, the officer who took him to the hospital found the pills in the back of his car. Once he took a pain pill, he kept talking." The ranger looked at Tim and Jeannie, who were sitting together, and asked if they were sure they wanted everyone to hear this. They talked it over and decided to let everyone know, so he shared that the attack was meant to kill Tim and capture Jeannie. The attackers were part of a local gang. They were trying to collect money that someone had put on Tim and Jeannie's heads. The note for Jeannie said she had to be captured alive and unharmed, while the note for Tim was just to kill him or take him alive. The room fell silent. Tim said, "I can guess who put out those bounties." "Seriously, is this the Wild West again?" The ranger let them calm down and then warned, "Tim, Jeannie, this changes everything. We need to put you both in protective custody while we search for the people who did this. We can't follow you around all the time without putting everyone in danger. Jeannie, you need to stop teaching right now. You can't go back until this is sorted out. Tim, we'll help with your needs, but you both have to stay at a safe place where no one can find you, and this needs to be done quickly, like tomorrow. Tim, we also have to protect your wife, kids, and her parents because they're at risk too. They will be housed separately. You two will be moved to a safe location nearby." Tim was already thinking fast, trying to figure things out as the ranger explained the situation. He could also see Joe Hildebrand on the edge of his seat, tense and listening closely. The worry and fear were clear on everyone else's faces, except for Jeannie. She looked angry and focused. Tim turned to Ranger Boyd, ready to share his idea. "Jim, I think we should do things a bit differently. Put Jeannie in protective custody and keep her safe. Call the sheriff where I live. Let him know what's happening, but ask him to keep it quiet. If he agrees, I can go home tomorrow morning and be there by afternoon. My brother can bring food and other things when he comes to check on the cattle. I'll sneak in the back roads and no one will know I'm there. I'll be safe, Jeannie will be safe, and no one will be in danger trying to watch over me. Sooner or later they will come for me unless I take a big risk like this. Any good sniper can shoot me from far away where my guards can't help, but if I'm out there I can see them with binoculars, have guard dogs, and I have good neighbors. Plus, I'm pretty good with a weapon myself if they find me." He leaned back, feeling good about his plan, but Jeannie was upset. "That makes no sense at all. I need to be with you. We need protection from the police. You're planning to hide, but you're really thinking of using yourself as bait, right? To either kill them or be killed." Tim answered without hesitating. "I get how you feel, but these guys won't stop. They're not following normal rules. They're dangerous criminals who have thrown away any hope of acting civilized. Do you think they want you safe because they want to chat? We know their plans. Would you risk becoming something terrible? If not, you need to accept protective custody and let me handle things at home. Once I'm in the wilderness, I'll be harder to catch. Here, I'm an easy target. I need to go home. You need to go into custody. Then we'll both be safer." Before Jeannie could respond, her father said, "You both have a point. Tim's right that these guys don't act normal anymore. They've turned into a pack of wild animals. Trying to avoid them won't work. At some point, you have to hunt them down. I hate to say it, Ranger, but I think you know that's true." The Ranger nodded, looking serious. "I've explained our stance, and we've made an offer. In cases where people act out violently, our usual methods are not enough." Joe Hildebrand jumped in again. "Tim, you're right, but Jeannie is also correct. If she's with you, there's more chance of both of you being okay. I don't know you well, but when I heard how Jeannie talks about you, I did some digging. I know, but if I had done that with Larry, we wouldn't be here now. I found out you're not just a typical college athlete." Joe asked, "Teacher, coach, father, why not include everyone?" He talked about Lois and her famous ringtones, like tales of Robin Hood and his merry men. "Tim, you're our Robin Hood. You stand up for the people," Joe said. "I bet you could make one call and get a group of sharpshooters around you in no time. They owe you. I read the report about the missing drug dealers. It didn't connect their disappearance to the fire at their house in the country. There was no evidence anyone ever lived there. The burned buildings didn't have the girls who went missing. Then, just like that, the girls showed back up the next day. They said they had been drugged and locked in a dark place for days. There were no bodies found, but suddenly the sale of dangerous drugs stopped, and the girls no longer went missing. Other counties nearby had similar problems. They also had fires from thunderstorms, and their missing girls returned with the same memory loss. The sheriff thought it was just a coincidence when you came home after that game year. They didn't seem worried about the drug dealers leaving." Joe spoke to Tim and the group. "My wife knows, my daughters don't, that I served in the Special Forces during the Vietnam War. I've seen and done things that aren't easy to talk about. But those experiences tell me we need to protect Jeannie, Tim, his sons, Karen, her family, and maybe Jennifer and Randy from these dangerous people using some special methods. Here's my plan. Law enforcement will guard Amelia, Kathy, Alan, Jimmy, Patty, and anyone else at risk. Jeannie and I will go with Tim to his ranch to hide out, and we will be ready to defend ourselves. Tim will keep everyone updated on what's happening. If nothing changes in 10 days, we will meet again to discuss our options." Tim replied, "I can't support any plan that takes law enforcement away from handling this. It's true, we're limited by the laws, but our organization can't support any actions like vigilante justice. But if you say you'll hide out at a remote ranch until law enforcement catches those who want to hurt you, I can't stop you. Is that clear?" Tim and Joe both nodded. Joe then turned to his family. "Given what we learned tonight, let's stay here tonight if there's space or somewhere close by. This will give the Ranger time to make plans. Tomorrow night, Tim, Jeannie, and I will go to the ranch under cover of darkness. The rest of you will go to the safe house with the Ranger. Tim's family will gather what we need. My firm will provide the protective gear and equipment. We will check in regularly through the Ranger unless he thinks it's safe to speak directly. We must be careful not to reveal anyone's location. Does anyone have objections or suggestions?" "Not from me, Captain Hildebrand," Tim said with a smile. Joe looked confused until Tim explained. "You didn't think you were the only one who looks into important people before meeting them, did you?" Jeannie, who had been quiet, spoke up with a sparkle in her eye. "Let's find a vehicle they don't know about that fits our situation in South Texas and switch it out somewhere along the way. Dad, do you have something like that in your inventory or at one of your dealerships?" Her dad smiled and agreed it was a great idea. Tim then added, "I have the ranch covered and the perfect vehicle for getting around on roads or in brush. We need something good for high-speed chases and dirt roads." Joe nodded. I have something for that. They decided Kathy would share Jeannie's room since they were short one bedroom. Kathy gave Alan a wink and said, Okay, but Jeannie better not snore. Jeannie shot back, We all know who snores, older sister, and it's not me. After saying goodbyes and goodnights, everyone but Alan and Kathy went to their rooms. As Jeannie and Tim walked down the hall, Tim whispered that if Kathy snored or hogged the bed and kept Jeannie awake, then Kathy could move to Tim's room. Jeannie elbowed him playfully, saying that would never happen. Tim made coffee as soon as he woke up. Hildebrand got dressed and sat on the porch with the Austin American-Statesman newspaper. He brought a cup of black coffee with sugar, just as Jeannie had told him he liked it. He folded the paper and set it on the table. They enjoyed the beautiful sunrise in silence. Finally, Hildebrand broke the quiet. How will you get some snow? He asked after a while. I want a friend, Will, Tim replied. It's like a phone tree where everyone has just one number, but by nightfall everyone will know where to meet. Is Monday night at 9 too soon for you? Hildebrand asked. No, that works perfectly, the captain said. We can talk about the details on the way down tonight, check the area tomorrow, and set everything up. I'm not sure how your stalkers will know where we are, but if we leave 2 days early, we'll be safer. I'm not sure we can guarantee 2 days, Joe said confidently. Larry wants to be there when Jeannie is caught, and they all want to watch you suffer. They heard Jeannie talking to someone in the kitchen, then she came out with coffee. She was wearing comfy pants and a jacket, with her hair in a ponytail, looking fresh and natural. But Tim thought she looked very nice. Her dad seemed happy to see her, smiling and accepting her kiss on the cheek. So, did you sleep well, honey? Dad asked. Kathy didn't keep you up with her snoring, did she? No, she didn't snore at all, Jeannie replied with a wink at Tim. I hardly noticed her. It was like I had the bed to myself. Tim winked back. Dad just smiled. Patty, Jimmy, Kathy, and Alan came outside. Patty said they should move to the big table on the patio. I made more coffee, she told everyone. And I'm up early making donuts, Jimmy added with a grin. I made some apple fritters and bear claws, too. They will be ready soon. I hope there are enough for the police who protected us all night, Patty said. Of course. There are enough for them and their shift that starts at 7. Mr. Jones is supposed to bring them over at 6:45. Oops, I shouldn't have said that, Jimmy laughed. Yeah, right. Like anyone here believes you got up at 4 a.m. to make donuts, Alan teased. We would have smelled that even if you were quiet. Tim enjoyed the friendly banter among these smart, nice adults, but he briefly thought about his charming wife, wishing she could join them if only he could shake off his sadness. He forced a smile and looked around. Only Jeannie noticed his true feelings, her expression matching his hidden sorrow. He smiled and winked again, and she smiled back. The 2 police officers who just finished their shift came onto the patio. The new team got a dozen donuts and some donut holes as snacks. Patty had cooked up some ham to go with breakfast and brought a gallon of milk to the table. She nodded at Tim. Someone here can't have breakfast without meat and milk. Everyone agreed they liked a bit of meat with their sweet treats, and Patty made a note to buy more next time. After breakfast, Tim called Ranger Boyd to confirm their plans and get some news. They learned that the police were only listening to Karen's phone calls. At 9 p.m., the police would move Karen and her family to a safe place. Tim, Joe, Jeannie, and the others would then take a longer route to San Antonio when it got dark. They would leave San Antonio for Tim's ranch right at 9 p.m. this way. They had a better chance of shaking off anyone following them before getting close. Since both safe spots were in the country, everyone was told to wear jeans and boots. Since Jeannie and her family couldn't go home for supplies, she and Alan were taken to a store to get clothes. Meanwhile, Tim went home with one of the officers to pick up what he needed. After grabbing his things, Tim asked the officer to take him to a payphone at a gas station where he called Karen. The boys were excited to talk to him and tried to tell him everything that had happened since he was in the hospital. After some time, Karen took the phone, looking worried. Tim reviewed the plans with her. She sounded scared and hesitant, so he asked to talk to her dad. He was calm about the need to keep safe. He said they would wait for the ranger to contact them. Then Karen asked where he would be hiding. Tim couldn't say, but asked if she could remember anything that could help keep them safe. She thought hard, but couldn't think of anything. After the call, Tim returned to the horseman's house and started watching videos. Although they were disturbing, he learned which local students were involved in some troubling scenes and why one babysitter wouldn't talk to the police. He also spotted 2 local leaders they didn't know much about, including one from the law enforcement side. Officers in uniform showed up to interrupt the party, but they ended up joining in on a wild situation involving Karen and a recent high school graduate named Tim. Tim called his friend Jim right away, asking him to come over quickly. They all met back at the house at 4 p.m. There, they found Jim had a big pot of catfish and hush puppies ready to fry, while Patty had everything else prepared for the meal. Tim and Jim stayed in the study watching videos until they were called for dinner at 6. When they came out, they looked worried. The 3 lawyers pulled them aside and Jeannie walked over. "What's wrong?" Ellen asked. "You guys look troubled." The ranger replied, "Let's just say we know much better where our leaks are and why the suspects have been escaping us. Plus, we understand the crimes more deeply." Tim shook his head, eyes closed, saying, "I had no idea. I can't believe I worked with those guys. Some of them are even teachers. No, they're not teachers. They're dangerous people pretending to be educators." Patty asked, "Should we put the food in the oven and talk or eat first?" Jim confidently replied, "It sounds like we need to rethink our plans. Let's eat and think a little about the new information before we start making big changes. I think we can move ahead, but now we know better how and who we should share information with. Anyway, let's eat, and then figure out our next steps." They enjoyed a nice meal and had great conversation. "I can't believe it, but we all feel like old friends now," Kathy laughed after a joke from Alan. "We will be by the end of this, stuck in a safe house together for days or weeks," Patty said. That comment brought a serious mood back to their light banter, reminding them of the real danger they faced. Ranger Boyd called everyone into the living room to discuss their plans again. When he revealed the names of some students, Jeannie looked shocked. She paled when he named certain elected officials. Her dad turned red and mumbled angrily. Boyd had spoken with the ranger in charge of Tim's sons and Karen's family. Now they had to move the evacuations to midnight, and they would go to different safe houses than they had planned. Tim, Jeannie, and Joe would quietly leave through the back door, go over the fence and down the alley to a simple car waiting for them. They would drive to Joe's dealership to switch vehicles, then stop by his place to grab weapons and clothes for their trip to Brush Country Ranch before heading southwest. Tim called his in-laws again that day. He talked with his kids for 20 minutes and then reluctantly spoke to his wife. The more he saw in the videos, the more he felt disgusted with her, but he wanted to give her one last chance to share something that might keep them safe. "Have you thought of anything else to tell me? Your time with the sheriff or Ranger Bird is running out. We need to move fast because we're in danger. Any names? Anything else?" Karen paused but shook her head. "So no other teachers, students, police, or officials you can think of? Someone must know what's going on." He added, "You don't want your kids and family harmed, so what are you holding back?" There was silence for a moment before she replied, "Let me talk to Ranger Bird. I don't feel safe talking to you since I know these lines are tapped." "Thanks," Tim said. "Take care of our sons and do what you're told. I'll talk to you as soon as this is over." At 11:55, they were driving south on I-35 in a 1978 Dodge Ram Charger. It had a strong engine and tough tires. The ride was loud with the engine rumbling, but Joe drove confidently, which he did because it was his vehicle. They took some detours to see if anyone was following them, but saw no sign of a tail. Joe filled up the tank in the last town before turning onto country roads leading to their destination. Everyone took bathroom breaks, and Tim bought large cups of coffee since it was already after 1:30 a.m. When they had traveled about a mile on the county road, they came to a long curve where some pavement was piled up for resurfacing. Tim had Joe pull off and wait for 10 minutes to check for any followers. When no one came, they continued to the ranch. They turned off the paved road and drove the last 2 miles on a bumpy sandy road. They reached the ranch entrance and stopped to open and lock 2 gates blocking the road to the house. Tim took off his shoes and climbed on the vehicle in his socks to look for any lights from followers. Convinced they weren't being trailed, they drove toward the house. When they reached the top of the first hill, they could see the ranch house on the second hill. The light by the water tank was on, but no other lights were visible. They stopped in some bushes and moved toward the house, guns ready just in case. Joe quickly ran back to the SUV while Jeannie and Tim entered the house. They checked the food in the fridge and pantry, which were both well stocked by Nate, Tim's brother. They also checked the bed to see if the sheets were clean and pulled back the covers to check for any scorpions hiding there. Joe parked by the back door. They carried their clothes, gear, and other things inside and set up where they would sleep. Jeannie took the bedroom, which had a full bathroom and a dressing area. Tim and Joe slept in the bunk beds against the wall and shared a small bathroom with a shower and a sink. Tired from the long day, they slept well until 8 the next morning. Tim woke up first, used the bathroom, and made a pot of coffee, which woke Jeannie and her dad. They enjoyed Tim's breakfast of eggs, bacon, and biscuits made from Pioneer mix while talking about their plans for the day. Tim noticed that Jeannie didn't show her feelings for him as much when her dad was around, but she still gave him little touches and friendly looks. When her dad wasn't paying attention, they got ready to go outside. They first planned to check out the area around the house and then think about how any bad guys might get onto the ranch. Jeannie was eager to explore the house and asked many questions about the old furniture. Tim told her much of it came from his grandparents and great-grandparents. Joe asked if the ranch belonged to Tim or if it was still owned by his family. Tim explained that this ranch had been a vacation place for his dad's parents before they decided to split their land among their children. They made that choice because of what they saw happen when their own parents passed away and listened to their lawyer's advice. Both families owned a lot of land but made very little money from it each year. However, the government taxed it like it was very valuable. By giving the land to their kids in smaller parts, they avoided taxes that could force their heirs to sell the land to pay. It was a strange situation, but Tim's grandparents understood how to work it. To protect their land, they started giving parts to their son, daughter, and grandkids before they turned 60. The ranch was Tim's gift from his grandparents, given to him in 125-acre pieces over 6 years. They gave him as much as they could each year, and he used money from selling cattle to pay for what was left. The grandparents wanted the land to stay big enough for raising cattle, so Tim's brother and sister also received similar gifts. Tim's brother, Nathaniel, known as Nate, got land close to town. It was only 400 acres, but it had good pasture and some farmland along with a nice family house. He and his high school sweetheart, Linda, loved the rolling hills and wanted to fill their big house with kids. His sister, Janice, known as Jan, chose a 500-acre ranch about 10 miles out of town by the Nueces River because it had rights for irrigation, a system set up already, and good fields. Her husband, Gary, owned a large cattle and horse ranch nearby. They lived there but grew hay for his quarter horses on the river place. Tim was the youngest grandchild. He wanted and got the most isolated ranch while he was still in high school. He convinced his friends to help do work on the 800-acre ranch so he could use it for hunting, fishing, and camping. Tim spent his free time making small improvements. He learned how to run a front loader, backhoe, and small bulldozer, as well as how to plow and shred with the ranch tractor. The equipment he used was sometimes borrowed from neighbors in exchange for helping them, and they all taught him how to use it first. Tim and his friends were liked by everyone because they were always eager to help with roundups and other ranch work for low pay and good food. Tim was especially close to Mr. Thurman, an old man who lived on the land next door. Mr. Thurman had never married and had no close family, so he often asked Tim for help. The bulldozer belonged to Mr. Thurman, and he taught Tim how to clear paths, fix the water tanks, and remove brush from the roads on his land before he let Tim work on his own land without supervision. Driving the bulldozer was a new challenge for Tim compared to using tractors. It was a tracked vehicle with many controls, but he quickly got the hang of it with Mr. Thurman's guidance. Land in that area had been held by families for many years, making it hard to buy more. Tim asked all his neighbors to give him the first chance if they decided to sell their land, and 2 years later, Mr. Thurman contacted him. Mr. Thurman owned 320 acres with a great water tank on a creek and a small one-bedroom house. Unfortunately, he had cancer and knew his time was short. He didn't want to die alone, so he planned to go to a nursing home with hospice care for his remaining days. He wanted to sell the land for a low price, but Tim offered him more money. Mr. Thurman refused, saying he would leave it for Tim in his will. Instead, he asked Tim and his friends to be his pallbearers and say a few words at his burial. Tim used his college savings, which he didn't need because he got a football scholarship, to buy the land. He paid cash and got a nice discount for paying the legal fees and title insurance in cash. Tim bought the land for just over $50 for each acre. He also helped out as a pallbearer and gave a speech, but he ended up getting more than just the land. He got a tractor, some extra equipment, and even more money than he initially paid. When they shared his story, they walked around the edge of the cleared land to make sure there wasn't anything a hidden attacker could use as cover. The 7-acre area had a well, a small shed for the water pump, a concrete trough for holding water, and a small cattle corral made of thick pipes. This land still showed signs of when screwworms used to harm so many cows and calves. Although the area was fenced, after it rained, water would collect there. Tim made sure to pour pesticide into the water from time to time to kill the mosquito larvae. They agreed that if they were attacked, one shooter would need to guard the open spots around the land, protecting it so attackers couldn't use those areas to aim at the house. Luckily, the house was built on top of a hill, a foot higher than the ground around it. So if someone shot at the house, they would have to shoot uphill, which made it harder to hit someone inside. When they walked back to the house, they looked at the windows to see what areas they could watch for danger. Inside, Joe took a half hour to check the walls and windows. The walls were made of strong concrete blocks covered with stone, which Joe said would stop any regular bullets. He liked that there were few windows on the west side, except for a small 2-foot window in the bathroom that stuck out from the house. People in South Texas usually don't put windows on the west side because the sun gets really hot. If there were windows on that side, they were high up, away from the heat. Shots fired through them would just hit the top of the walls, which were also solid. The north wall had only one window, a 3-foot window above the kitchen sink that was a little risky, but it was at least 5 feet high. Anyone shooting at it would be from lower ground as the hill went down quickly. Joe was more worried about the east side where the screened porch was. The 3-foot windows there were only 3 feet off the ground, so they could be dangerous for anyone inside. Since the county road was to the east and both entrances to the ranch were from that road, they knew they had to keep a close watch in that direction. After deciding on their defensive spots, they all hopped into Joe's truck and drove to the mesquite pins used for branding and shipping cattle. This area was at the southeast corner of the ranch. The ranch worker, Daniel, and his wife, Dora, lived in a small wooden house near a well not far from the pins and barns. They had worked for Tim's family for years, and their kids were friends with Tim and his siblings. Even though their kids were grown up now, the Mendez family was still close to them. Joe and Jeannie were impressed by the mesquite pins and the shipping chutes, as well as the shaded area with a large table and benches. Nearby were 2 barbecue pits, and an old chuck wagon was stored under a tin roof close to a larger barn. Tim gave them a quick tour and shared stories about the place before leading them into the barn. After checking out the chuck wagon and learning how they served food from it during spring events, Tim shifted the big barn doors to uncover a vehicle covered by a tarp. With excitement, he pulled the tarp off to show off his favorite truck. It was a well-cared-for 1948 Dodge Power Wagon. The truck was painted gray inside and out and was raised 6 inches with tough tires for off-roading. It had a powerful 3.9L diesel engine, giving it a sturdy look, ready for any challenge. Tim invited them to check inside, showing how well he had taken care of it after getting the land for a good price. Jeannie was amazed, while her dad couldn't stop praising what he thought was an incredible truck. He pointed out feature after feature, saying he wouldn't even know how to price such a special vehicle, considering it priceless. When Tim told them the truck had less than 20,000 miles, her dad shook his head, still amazed, saying it was truly one of a kind. "Take care of it and never sell it," he added. "One day it will be worth more than a house." Still in awe, Jeannie hugged Tim and looked up at him, asking, "Can we take it for a ride?" Tim glanced at her dad, who was watching him closely after hearing her call him honey. Jeannie caught herself and quickly turned to her dad, saying, "I didn't mean to say that, Dad. It just came out." Her dad's serious look softened as he burst into laughter. Once he calmed down, he said to Jeannie, I was curious to see how long you two would pretend to be just friends, but the look on both your faces said it all. You've been acting like this for almost 2 years now. Do you remember your mom telling you to keep your guy friends just as friends? She probably said this after he rescued you from your husband, right? Well, here's the thing. Your mom, your sister, and I talked on our way to Austin. We decided to let you both keep having fun together. I know your lawyers say you should wait until the divorces are final before showing feelings. But honestly, I think your exes already let go of you when they did what they did. And look around. It's just us here. You don't have to hide. I mean, I don't want to see you two kissing or anything like that right in front of me. But calling him honey is perfectly fine. Once that was cleared up, he hugged Jeannie, smiled at her, and kissed her forehead. She glowed with happiness. Joe looked at Tim, who was no longer worried but relaxed. Tim reached out his hand, and Joe pulled him into a hug, with Jeannie sandwiched between her 2 favorite men. I thought we should just stay like that. But after a moment, Dad let go and said we still had work to do. First, I want to see what's in this barn and the other 2 buildings. After that, I want to take the big truck for a spin. Jeannie kept her arm around him when he tried to pull away, so he led them over to look at the tractor and opened the tack room door. The tack room had a wooden floor that was a bit higher than the dirt floor of the barn. Inside were several custom saddles on wooden stands, saddle blankets hanging from a rope, and reins on hooks. There were also 4 branding irons on nails, some bags of plastic ear tags in different colors, and a couple of tools on a wooden bench. Jeannie was curious and checked out each saddle carefully. Joe spotted a can of kerosene and another labeled burnt oil. "What are those for?" he asked. "The burnt oil is put on the calf after it's branded to help the brand heal," Tim explained. "Kerosene is used for many things, like starting fires for lanterns or treating stings from scorpions and wasps. Dad is the only one who still sells it, but lots of old ranchers buy it in bulk because it's so handy." Jeannie was still bent over exploring another saddle, which made Tim a bit distracted. She asked, "What does the symbol under each strap mean?" Tim replied, "That's the saddle maker's mark. Trey Hayward is the best in the business, and that's how you can tell it's one of his saddles." She nodded and asked, "Which one is yours?" Tim pointed to 3 saddles. "These 3 are mine. The 2 are the same except for size. The smaller one is my first saddle when I was younger, and the larger one I got when I turned 14. I'm saving the smaller one for my children. That one with silver is my grandfather's, and the other is my grandmother's. These are my parents, and those belong to Daniel and Doris. The rest are for anyone to use." Jeannie was curious about another saddle with many designs. "Whose is that?" she asked. "That's mine. I used it in high school for the only rodeo I ever entered. I like watching rodeos, but I never understood some events, like why a person would jump off a horse onto a fast steer, or why someone would try to ride a bull. We do some of those things on the ranch, but we avoid horses that buck." Jeannie moved on to 2 other saddles. "Can I use one of these?" she asked, pointing at pretty saddles made for women. Tim grinned and said, "Of course. I'm sure after they meet you, my mom and grandmother will let you borrow theirs." "Oh, are these your mom and grandma's saddles? Maybe I should wait," she said. Tim assured her it would be fine. When they walked out of the barn, they saw Daniel washing up by their house, and Dora walking toward them with her arms open wide. "We saw the truck on the hill this morning, so we knew you were back. Come introduce us to your friends and let's eat. I made all your favorites," Dora exclaimed. Tim smiled and walked quickly to her, picking her up and spinning her around. Daniel came over with a big grin and patted Tim on the back. Tim hugged him back and said, "Tio Daniel, this is Jeannie and her dad, Joe Hildebrand." After they exchanged greetings, Tim told them, "They're here to help me with a problem, and I'll need your help too. But first, let's eat tortillas, carne asada, frijoles, and rice." "Sounds good. I can't wait," Tim said happily. Dora laughed and said, "Let's go," as she put her arm around him. "Where have you been so long? We missed you," Daniel added. Tim replied, "Too long. I won't let that happen again." As they enjoyed the amazing meal, Jeannie and Joe found the conversation friendly and full of useful info about the cattle, spring crops, and important events happening in the area. Finally, Daniel asked, "What's the problem? We can help you with your story." Tim started to explain briefly, but Dora wanted more details. She snorted in annoyance when she heard about Karen's actions that led to the current troubles and cursed in Spanish. When she found out about Tim's gunshot wounds from the first attempt on his life, she exclaimed, "So that's why you're walking funny and flinch when I hug you. Where were you hit?" Tim showed her the wounds and she cursed again, using colorful words about the guy who shot him. Daniel, a World War II veteran, looked angrier as Tim continued to share the story. "Have you told your family?" Daniel asked. Tim said he hadn't because they wanted to understand the situation first. Daniel shook his head. "No, you need to tell your brother. Sora, you can use our phone." Tim looked at Joe, who said, "We're almost ready, Tim. After we drive around, we will know what we need to know. Then it's just a matter of setting things up, spreading the news and getting your people in place before they arrive." Tim walked to the phone and called a man in his office in New Braunfels. The man answered on the second ring and Tim said, "What's up, everything good? There's a big party at the Mendez Ranch in Austin tomorrow night." There was a pause before Tim added, "Yes, all my cousins are coming." Tim laughed and replied, "All right, brother, see you tomorrow." He hung up thinking to himself, the die is cast. As he went back to the group, Jeannie looked puzzled and asked, "You speak Spanish?" "Sure. Most people here speak both English and Spanish or even a mix. They made us take 2 foreign languages in high school," Tim answered with a grin. Teodora added, "Without Tomatillo's help, my son would have failed Spanish and not graduated. I don't know where they speak that kind of Spanish, but not here or in Mexico." Daniel asked if the party would be at the shed in Corral again. Tim said it would be, and Dora asked Jeannie if she could help set up the lights and decorations. Jeannie eagerly agreed, and Dora suggested starting tomorrow at 8:30, as long as she made breakfast. They all agreed since her cooking was amazing. Tim and Daniel decided to split the cattle between the Thurman pasture on the east and the back quarter on the west. Tim asked who wanted to help round up cattle that afternoon, and was pleased when Jeannie volunteered before the 2 men could respond. She had never mentioned being a cowgirl or rider, but she surprised him every day. "Why not?" Daniel said he would have the horses ready in an hour. Tim unhooked the trickle charger, and the old power wagon started right up. Jeannie and Daniel climbed in front with him, and they rode along the ranch roads for an hour, looking for any danger and places to set traps for intruders. With the cattle safe in the 320-acre Thurman pasture and the 160-acre western section, they could set up traps without worrying about harming the livestock. Back at the barn, Tim insisted everyone wear protective chaps, a brush jacket, and a hat. Jeannie looked unsure about the outfit, but Tim thought she looked cute. She picked out a saddle blanket, reins, and his grandmother's saddle. She squealed with joy when Daniel offered her the shiny black mare, which they called the Black Mare. Tim helped her saddle the horse and then saddled his favorite mare, Blue. Blue was happy to see him, nuzzling his face in greeting. He gave her some sweet feed and rubbed her neck before putting on the bridle and saddling her. Daniel mounted a red quarter horse, a great cutting horse, and took the big black stallion that needed to be ridden. They rode around the herd of nearly 100 red Santa Gertrudis cattle, with Daniel in front, Jeannie on the right side, Joe on the right flank, and Tim on the left. The cattle were calm, and the lead steer followed as he had been trained. The ride was calm, but Jeannie and Joe quickly learned why wearing chaps and jackets was important as they guided the cattle toward the ranch house. Tim looked back and saw his brother's pickup turning onto the ranch road. By the time they moved the cattle through the gap to the back quarter and secured it, Nate was sitting on the truck's tailgate. "Want a cold beer?" Nate asked, opening the cooler. Everyone said yes, and Nate pulled out long-neck beers, nodding to Joe and Jeannie. "Sorry, all I have is Lone Star Red, because that's all my brother and Daniel will drink." Nate jumped off the tailgate, took off his hat, and introduced himself to Jeannie and Joe before putting his hat back on and handing out the cold beers. "So, Miss Jeannie, are you a cowgirl by trade?" Nate asked. She took a long sip of the cold drink, smiled, and replied, "Actually, this is my first cattle roundup, but you knew that since you're teasing me like your brother does." Nate tilted his head and observed, "Well, you're doing great." "You should probably lean a bit more on your stirrups or your behind is going to hurt tomorrow," Joe said with a smile. Tim, Daniel, and Jeannie blushed a little. Jeannie tilted her head and looked at Nate before she spoke. I can see you are really Tim's brother. The first thing you notice when you arrive is my cute behind, she said with a cheerful voice. Thanks for the tip. I wouldn't want that. Nate laughed at her answer and replied, Sorry, Miss Jeannie. I didn't think Tim would bring someone who lacks humor and self-confidence down to this tough place to meet his family and friends. I just had to check. Even in all your cowgirl gear, you look great being here, he added. Jeannie turned around to face them, bent over and asked, Is my cute behind okay? Did I hurt it? Daniel and Joe burst into laughter with Jeannie at the joke. Nate and Tim were enjoying the moment, smiles on their faces. What do you think, bro? Looks good to me. How about you? Tim asked. Nate tilted his head and frowned, saying, Hard to tell from here. Why don't you come over and let us see it a bit closer, Miss Jeannie? She took a couple of steps toward them but stayed just out of reach, glancing back at them. The brothers leaned forward and looked closely. Finally, Nate said, Yep, I'd say your behind is in great shape even with all the bouncing. Jeannie wiggled a bit and asked, Tim, do you think so too? Tim replied, It's probably even better than that, but yes, I think your behind looks perfect, no matter the bumps. He added as he reached his hand toward her, I'd have to check it up close to be sure. Jeannie quickly moved away from his hand, waved her fingers at him and said, No touching my behind, it's sore. Then she laughed, took a long drink from her beer, winked at both brothers and went back to pet her horse. You finally met your match, didn't you? Daniel joked, and the brothers nodded in agreement, looking a bit embarrassed. Joe chuckled at his daughter's fun side and thought about where this part of her personality had been for so long. Then the mood turned serious when Nate asked, So there's a party tomorrow night at Daniel and Doris's and my wife and I are invited. What's the celebration for? Nate, you don't have to get involved. You heard we're expecting and… Nate interrupted. Didn't you hear my question? What is the celebration? Tim hesitated a bit, but then Joe and Jeannie jumped in to explain. Tim sat quietly, drinking his beer while they talked, and Nate asked more questions. When they were done, he patted Tim on the shoulder and said, Wow, bro, I can't believe Karen got into something like that. You're handling it better than I thought. A lot better than I'd be if Linda did something similar. Tim looked down and then at Jeannie, replying, I've had support from friends and time to think. I won't ever be okay with what she did, and I'm worried about my boys. But right now, I'm focused on keeping Jeannie, my kids, and myself safe and staying away from Karen and her family, as well as the lawyers. About the party, he continued. We'll see who is still around, make some plans, and let the others know where we are. If I'm still here and not in jail after they come looking for us, I guess I'll face those tough choices again. For now, though, I want to keep everyone safe, and I also want some revenge. I can't promise it will go well, but I don't plan to let those hunting us get away. You might want to stay out of this. Most of the results will stay secret, but they'll want to talk to you, my brother. You need a solid alibi, like being seen somewhere else. Where should I go then? Nate asked. Everyone important in this county would wonder why I'm in town while we're dealing with the bad guys, right? They'd think a lot better of me than I think of myself or what Linda would think. Stop that. Have I ever backed down from a fight? Have I ever let you down? Do you really think I'd hide while someone is trying to hurt you? Nate shook his head and gazed at his brother, tears welling in his eyes. You know I don't believe that, but I can't bear the thought of losing you or your child never knowing their father. Still, I know you too well. Thank you, and I love you. Tim assured him, My child will know their father and uncle. We've faced tough situations before. We've overcome them with your help. We've fought a lot of challenges since you've been away, Nate replied. Trust us. We'll protect you and the lovely lady with the sore behind. Jeannie walked over, wiping tears from her eyes, and hugged both Tim and Nate, saying, We're going to be okay, Tim. Between you, Dad, Daniel, and your friends whom you call brush rats for some reason, we're going to take down a bad guy. But then, Tim put his hand on her back and said, Looks like you'll be okay. She stepped back and playfully hit him on the arm, pretending to be angry. Let's get back on the horses. I'm ready to ride, but you two will stay in front of me the whole way back, got it? They took a detour by the house where Nate had dropped off more food, a bag of bullets, and some guns. He said he bought them with cash at gun shows, then winked. Or, he joked, Maybe they came from some bad people who ran away and left them behind when they saw Lowe's catalogs in the bushes. Tim asked if the rattlesnakes got them all. Nate shrugged. Joe carefully checked the AR-15 and the magazines, saying they were top quality. He especially liked the shotgun, saying it would stop anyone right at the door. Daniel watched, but when he was offered a gun, he said he preferred to use his own. Daniel drove Nate's truck back to the barn so Nate and the others could look for good places to shoot and any traps Joe and Tim had talked about. When they got back to the barn door, someone shouted that Tim got a call and needed to return it quickly. He ran to the house and dialed the number written on a pad by the phone for Ranger Jim Boyd. "How can I help you?" Tim introduced himself, and they talked. Tim felt happy Nate was still there when they finished. He said he would call back early the next morning after the party so they could make final choices. Back at the barn, the horses were restless as they were being washed and brushed. Joe and Nate looked at him expectantly. The good news is, the ranger said there are 2 officials, a district judge, and 4 police officers involved. This includes high-ranking members of the Highway Patrol and 2 state troopers, he explained. The governor called it a big mess when he heard about it. Tim continued, "He told me that almost all were involved with possibly underage girls, except one. That one had relations with Karen and Jennifer, and so did the sheriff, who is already in jail. Now they understood how the plans were getting leaked." "If that's the good news, what's the bad?" Joe asked. It turns out Benson and Rogers were connected to a client of Benton who had ties to a Mexican cartel. They weren't sure how many, but it was said that the cartel could be sending trained soldiers to help them. "I want to stop this," he said, "but unless we're facing a lot of trained soldiers, I want to end this now." "What are you thinking?" Joe replied that he would support Tim whatever he decided. Jenny said she would stick with her men, and Daniel just shrugged. Nate thought for a moment and said, "We don't want to start a fight with the cartel, but we need to finish this. Just give me until the pachanga. I'll see what I can find out." Nate told the others to keep planning, knowing that they might have to act fast. Then he paused, looked at Jeannie, and jokingly said, "Of course, I wouldn't mind seeing you without your pants." She was surprised, but then turned red and caught herself. She hit him playfully and replied, "I see, so being a weirdo runs in your family." He laughed, kissed her on the cheek, and said, "You'd fit right in with the Kellys. You can give as good as you take, and not many can handle how we tease." The smell of coffee, bacon, and baking biscuits woke Tim up at 7. Jeannie and her dad were quietly working in the kitchen, talking softly. "Good morning, sleepyhead," she called as he turned towards the bathroom. One thing solved, and he wanted to get a cup of coffee. Jeannie held out a cup for him. Her bright smile warmed him on the chilly morning, but her teasing wink almost brought embarrassment. "Dad is taking Dora and me shopping in Laredo for the party tonight. We'll leave at 7:30 and be back after lunch. Don't worry about decorating. The wives of some of your friends are handling that, which gives you time to clear everything out. Oh, and Dora said you need to call Nate soon." Tim was confused. "Did I sleep for 24 hours? When did all this get decided?" Jeannie explained that she and her dad got up at 5:30 to watch the sunrise, and Dora and Daniel arrived with a new plan around 6:15. "And what about your pet?" she added, noticing he hadn't done anything. "Don't you think you should call for help?" Tim sat quietly, sipping his coffee and eating biscuits slathered in gravy, pretending he didn't hear. "Earth to Tim," Jeannie called, gently shaking his arm. Looking at his food, he grumbled, "A man should be able to enjoy his breakfast without being nagged, especially without a kiss." "And how do you do?" Joe chuckled, while Jeannie frowned as she tried to understand his odd way of speaking. When it clicked, she grinned, turned to Tim, and kissed him sweetly. "How do you do, darling? Just to clarify, didn't you just say I'm your woman? Well, I guess you're my girl. No other cowboy can make you howl like you did last night," Tim said in his country voice. Joe laughed. Jeannie turned red, lightly hit Tim on the shoulder and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry." When Tim flinched, he rubbed his shoulder and said in a playful voice, "It hurts. Can you kiss it and make it better?" She looked at him with a little suspicion, but leaned in to kiss his shoulder as he asked. Tim grabbed her by the waist, pulled her onto his lap, and gave her a serious kiss. You better hurry back and don't spend all your dad's money shopping, he warned her when he let her go. She looked a bit breathless and seemed like she wanted another kiss. But what if your dad is watching? She asked. No more kisses for you. It's almost 7:30. We'll see how fancy you look tonight, then I'll think about more kisses. Some of my old girlfriends will be there, and they're pretty nice looking. She pushed him playfully and covered her face. I keep hurting you. I'm really sorry. Tim laughed. I was just teasing about it hurting. I guess being outside and exercising has helped me because I barely feel it anymore. That wasn't completely true. His arm and leg were healing fast, but they had bigger issues to handle soon. Tim got dressed and took the power wagon to meet Daniel and call Nate. Nate was especially excited. You're going to love this news, brother. It's not the cartel. They're the same wannabe gangsters we already beat before. Well, make that twice, since you weren't there for the second time. They are dangerous, but they aren't smart or well-trained like cartel soldiers. If we do this right, we can end this before it starts. Good. I'll be out in an hour with some supplies and equipment. Can you make sure the irrigation well works? We need to fill the tank and get some water into the arroyo between the hills. I'll explain more when I get there. Okay, sounds good, Tim answered. Dora went shopping with Jeannie and her dad, so you might want to bring lunch. Daniel has brisket cooking for the party, but we have too much to do to stop and make lunch, Nate suggested. How about a pan of enchiladas from Echo's Cafe, a salad and some rice? Tim asked. I'm sure Daniel can find some flour tortillas, too. That sounded tasty, but they might need a nap afterward. Afterward, Tim and Daniel turned on the irrigation well. The tank was already full, so water flowed out into the arroyo. They stopped it and talked about their plan. Tim smiled after a moment, and they went to the shed to move equipment out so the women could decorate. There was an oil spot under the tractor. Daniel laid out cat litter to soak it up, then started pulling tables and chairs from the storage building. Tim used a blower to clean dirt off the concrete floor, and then washed off the remaining dirt and oil with a power washer. They were ready when the decorating committee arrived, which led to many hugs and warm welcomes. Tim knew every one of them, having been friends with some before they got married. Once they got started, Tim used a ladder to hang up Christmas lights that had been up year-round and helped Daniel set up the tables and chairs based on what the decorating committee wanted. The committee decorated the tables and hung banners between the posts. The DJ showed up with his gear, and the two men helped him set up a large sound system. He tested everything and adjusted the volume, then headed back to town. The decorating committee said goodbye and left. Nate and Chewie arrived right after they left, and they ate lunch at an extra table so they wouldn't upset the decorating committee by dirtying a tablecloth. After lunch, they talked about Nate's plan to deal with the expected trouble. In a few days, there were some changes after they checked the area where they expected trouble. Tim wanted to wait for more input from the colonel before finalizing anything. Chewie was another Vietnam vet and had great ideas for traps, but those traps had to be understood and avoided by everyone. The shoppers came back around 3 instead of 1:30, bringing a full pickup of bags. The word was out. They took stuff out of the truck and went inside. Tim, Nate, Chewie, and Daniel were sitting under the palm trees by the cattle pens and watched. Joe waved from the window as he and Jeannie carried the rest of the bags inside. A couple of bags were clearly from Mexico, but Tim also noticed bags from different stores. He wondered how they had time to shop at all these places between 9 a.m. and 2 p.m. Joe said he and Dora kept the others on a short leash and laughed. I didn't know how long we'd be here, what we'd be doing, or that we wouldn't have a washer and dryer. I needed clothes, Jeannie explained. It looks like you got a lot of clothes, Nate teased. But is that really enough for staying here a month or so? Not even close, Jeannie replied. Now I know where all the best stores are, she said to Tim. I got you and Dad something nice. 2 good leather belts with shiny buckles from Mexico, some new Wrangler jeans, and some Western-style shirts from Joe Brand. Tim gave her a sharp look. So, you got 5 bags of clothes and just got us a belt, jeans, and a shirt? That seems a bit selfish, don't you think? She smiled back. Next time you can come with me. With the big fiesta just hours away, Nate and Chewie headed to town. Jeannie started getting ready. Tim took Joe to show him the battlefield and got his thoughts on the new plans, including the traps Chewie suggested. Like Chewie, Joe was a Vietnam veteran. He agreed that traps would be useful in leading the enemy into a bad spot. He also suggested a few more locations. He was unsure about Nate's idea to make the enemy visible, but he thought it could quickly change the fight into an easy win if it worked. If not, the other plans should be enough. Back at the house, the men used the small bathroom to shower and shave. Jeannie took her time in the big bathroom with the dressing table. When Tim walked out, fully dressed in the new clothes Jeannie had picked, he and Joe burst out laughing, pointing at each other in surprise. Joe's Western shirt was black with gold and silver swirls over the top. Tim's Mexican-style shirt was bright white with green vines and red roses. Even the cuffs had embroidery of flowers and vines. Once they calmed down, they opened some Lone Star beers, sat at the table, and joked about each other's outfits. They had liked each other from the start, but had become close friends over the last few days. Maybe it was their shared love for Jeannie that brought them together, but mostly they just enjoyed each other's company. They were on their second beers when they heard the door handle turn. They quickly shifted to see Jeannie's big entrance, and it was indeed big. Her long hair fell beautifully to her shoulders, her face had light makeup, and her lips shone bright pink. Her dress was a mix of bright Mexican colors, pink, blue, green, and yellow, swirling from light to dark shades. She twirled to show off her skirt and a little more of her shapely leg, asking playfully, "How do I look?" The question was silly, and she knew it. Neither Tim nor her dad had closed their mouths since she arrived. "Jeannie, you must have picked that when you and Dora sent me back to the Cadillac bar for lunch," Joe said. He smiled a little, but his face was serious. "As pretty as it is, I'm not sure I like it. It looks too much like something on my youngest daughter." Tim cut in, "Sorry, Dad, but I have to disagree. She looks very, very nice." Jeannie smiled and twirled again, giving Tim a peek at her white lace underwear. Her dad covered his eyes, but Tim's eyes went wide. When she said, "They match," with a cheeky grin, she asked, "Are you both ready to go? You both look so nice in your new clothes. I can't wait to show you off." Tim corrected her. "You mean you're going to show yourself off, right? You're going to cause a scene when you walk in late like this." He checked his watch. "And I'm telling you now, I'm not fighting half the town to keep your honor, so don't drink too much or flirt around." As Jeannie walked to the door, she shook her hips and teased, "I can't help it if guys think I'm cute and want to talk to me." "Dad, can you deal with this?" Tim joked, and they both laughed. Tonight was going to be interesting. He had a feeling Jeannie in this tight blue dress would turn heads, and he wondered what her dad would think when he saw her. Joe parked in a spot Dora had saved right next to the shed, with the passenger door facing the crowd. Some people noticed the new truck, but most kept chatting happily. Jeannie waited for Tim to open her door and help her step down from her dad's tall truck. Normally, she would jump out, but this was her moment in front of Tim and his friends. Theodora had told her that showing up as a stunning woman in eye-catching Mexican style would grab their attention, and it seemed to be working. As the noise faded, all eyes were on her and her handsome companion. Tim looked great, with his strong body in tight jeans and a fitted shirt, wearing a stylish black hat and boots that drew attention. Joe stood back, letting his daughter take the spotlight, thinking maybe his little girl hadn't changed completely. The next half hour flew by as Jeannie met new people with her dad and reconnected with Tim. Tim and Joe laughed at their outfits, but they also fit right in. As glamorous as Jeannie looked, she was perfect for the occasion. Nate may not have been as tall or built as Tim, but Jeannie thought he looked good in his cowboy clothes. She also had to admit his wife, Linda, was stunning. Linda was around 5 feet 9 inches tall with wavy chestnut hair, a slender but curvy figure, and long, shapely legs. She felt jealous of Linda until Linda loudly admitted she was envious of Jeannie's pretty blonde hair, great figure, and beautiful legs. Leaving the brothers behind, the new friends walked away together, arms linked. Linda told Jeannie she needed to meet all her friends, and she had to share everything about her and Tim being together again. Nate teased as he walked with Tim, putting his arm around him. They headed toward a group of men by the keg, and Nate continued joking about his wife. "You need to meet all the Swiss cousins and Kuna again, and you have to tell me everything about you and Jeannie." Tim nudged Nate with his elbow, and they both laughed as they approached the kegs. They were greeted warmly by the friends they'd known for years. About a dozen men stood around the kegs, while an equal number of women gathered around Jeannie at the punch bowl, filled with Cheetah's famous rum punch. Cheetah said the recipe came from her grandmother, but anyone who tried it thought it was made by pirates who had too much rum. It tasted great, but it could really affect anyone who had more than a couple of cups. Jeannie had been warned, but Tim saw she was chatting and drinking happily, and he worried about her health. Did she have a strong stomach? Tim asked Joe when he joined them. She's so tiny and is drinking that punch like it's just water. Joe shook his head. Not really, but she drinks too much when she's nervous, and she's been nervous since early morning, so keep an eye on her. Oh, there are many watching her tonight, Nate said to the guys. Most of them nodded, saying they would keep an eye on her all night with smiles at Tim. Someone from another group said something to Jeannie and Linda, and all the women waved at the men, refreshed their drinks, and joined them. Tim couldn't tell if Jeannie was already feeling the effects of the punch, or just excited about the party and all the new faces. He heard a whistle from the grill and saw Daniel motioning for them to help carry ice chests filled with brisket. Daniel and his crew had been checking on the brisket all afternoon and letting it rest in the ice chests wrapped in paper. It took 2 men for each 64-quart chest, and there were 3 full of brisket. That was way too much for that night, but left a lot for their guests to take home. That's the way it was in South Texas. They unwrapped the brisket on a cutting board at the end of a long table full of covered dishes brought by guests, and Daniel started to cut it, asking each guest where they wanted their pieces. The Kelly brothers, Linda, Jeannie, and Joe, waited until last to greet each of their 80-odd guests before getting their plates. Doris stood behind the table, ready to refill anything from a table behind her where extras were stored. Jeannie had already won over many of the women, and the men were drawn just by standing near her. Tim knew she was already accepted by everyone because Linda treated her like a sister, and she was with him. He wondered how she explained her relationship with him to the crowd of women. He hadn't shown much affection yet, but everyone seemed to think they were together. Debbie asked why no one had mentioned Karen. Tim figured that Linda, Dora, and Daniel were the reason for that. The food was fantastic. Daniel was an expert at cooking. Doris's special sauce was different from what people usually had in Central Texas, and also unlike the typical South Texas food. The dishes brought by guests were just as tasty and unusual. Dora's homemade tamales had secret ingredients that created flavors no one could truly describe. The DJ started playing fun background music as soon as the first guests got dessert. By the time the Kellys, Hildebrandt, and Mendez finished their tres leches cake, lively Mexican polka music was playing, and dancers started twirling. Jeannie and Linda were dancing in their seats, glancing at their partners with excitement. The brothers stood up to ask them to dance. After 5 polkas, the DJ suddenly played a slow country song, and Hank Williams sang, "I'm So Lonesome I Could Cry." As couples looked at each other and embraced, Jeannie lifted her pretty face, met Tim's eyes, and then rested her head on his chest while holding his waist tightly. They danced without speaking, and Tim saw other couples smiling at them. She smelled wonderful, was light on her feet, and was a great dancer. They moved together so well, he couldn't help but notice her closeness. When she felt him, she looked up and smiled mischievously, leaning against him more. When the song ended, he held her close and whispered, "You made this happen. We need to keep it a secret." Another slow song started. She wrapped her arms around his neck, leaned back so her chest was away from him, and pressed her lower body against him. She tilted her head a little, smiled sweetly, batted her eyes, and asked, "What do you mean, Tim? I heard you tell people we are just work friends with a shared problem. Surely a friend wouldn't cause this kind of reaction." "I might have downplayed our relationship," he replied. "Downplayed? Just a little?" she asked. "Well, maybe a bit more than that," he said. She pressed against him and playfully continued, "So it's more than just a little. Did you mean a lot, or are you really saying you care about me?" But he couldn't say that. He spoke softly, reminding me that we're both married, and I don't want our friends to misunderstand our relationship. I wouldn't worry about it. Between Dora, Linda, and Nate, our story is well known among your friends. Your ex-girlfriend, who was a lawyer, once said that if 2 people make an agreement and one of them breaks it, the agreement is no longer valid. They know our marriages are over, and they're just glad I'm not someone trying to ruin what they have." So she cuddled closer to him as the music played and they moved around the floor. Tim noticed her dad talking with some of the older couples, including Chewy, his wife Alicia, Dora, and Daniel. Their talk seemed serious for a party, and occasionally Joe and the others glanced over at him. He wasn't sure if it was about their conversation or how Joe's daughter was dancing with him. Patsy Cline was singing Crazy, which kept them swaying on the dance floor. Tim looked at the couples, recalling his connections with each of them, and it hit him that these are his people. It was easy to feel hurt by his wife and friends when he watched those old videos, but tonight he realized he shouldn't. None of them truly cared for him. Except Karen. No one here would have done what they did to him. Sure, Karen was very attractive, but his true friends wouldn't have tried to charm her. If she had attempted to flirt with them, they would have turned her down and told Tim. He felt like his heart was toughening, becoming hard like concrete each day, fueled by his anger and determination. It wasn't just about being hurt, it was about the disrespect. Every one of them, including his wife, treated him badly. To make it worse, Karen disrespected her husband, her family, and the promises she made in front of all their friends and family. Even though she seemed to be taking care of their sons, his decision to end things with her became less sharp. But now, he understood that none of the women at this party would have done what she did, and his resolve became strong again. Jeannie seemed to notice his inner struggle. She hugged him tighter and whispered something that sounded like, "I love you." He returned the gesture, whispering similar words into her hair, and glanced over at her dad and the others to see how they were feeling. They were gone. He twirled Jeannie around the floor, scanning the entire space. He didn't see anyone, but he noticed a new fire starting in the cattle pen. "It's time, sweetheart," he told the beautiful girl in his arms. "We need to have our meeting." She loosened her hold and looked up at him. "You and Dora need to explain things to the women. I'll be with the men," he added. "We can't say when or how many, but we need to be ready. Starting tomorrow afternoon, anyone could be at risk due to the involvement with Los Diablos. They need to understand how dangerous some of their men have been in the last 3 events, and at least 2 of them were among the girls saved from being sold into slavery. Make them understand. Tell them what you need to about the people who have been trying to harm me and kidnap you, but help them see the danger. We don't want to lose friends because they aren't paying attention." Jeannie stepped away. Tim signaled the DJ to stop the music. He asked the women to stay in the shed and the men to head to the cattle pens. He stood up and followed, while Jeannie moved toward Dora. Once all the men were gathered around the fire in the cattle pen, Tim called Nate, Joe, Chewy, and Daniel to join him. Chewy brought his younger brother Abel over. Tim briefly shared the situation and then mentioned that anyone with other duties should leave without hard feelings. Nobody moved. He took a breath and continued, this time explaining more about who was involved and why. He admitted they didn't know when trouble would come or how many would show up, so they needed to stay alert and ready for an unknown amount of time. He expressed that with Los Diablos involved, everyone, maybe including their families, could be at risk. He told them that the women were being informed of the same information back at the shed. For the next steps, he asked Nate, Joe, Chewy, and Daniel to share their plans. Nate talked about the battle plans. Joe added details, and Chewy and his brother discussed the traps and supplies they would need. Daniel explained his role in keeping everyone connected before, during, and after the conflict. Tim turned to the 2 off-duty sheriff's deputies and asked them to explain their part. Jose nodded to Jesse, who spoke up. "You all know Miguel, and he knows you, but neither the sheriff's office nor state law will step in until something happens, and that could be too late. We must respect the law, but more importantly, we need to understand that its purpose is to protect people from criminals." His office and other law agencies are worried about rumors they're hearing. These rumors are about a drug gang that has caused issues in South Texas before, helping men who want to kill, kidnap, or enslave people over a grudge. He wants someone on guard at all times, starting tomorrow. We need to drive unmarked cars with good radios. If criminals come onto the ranch, we must communicate in code and defend those at risk. Other deputies will be hidden along all the roads that lead here. They will let us know if they see anything strange. Mis amigos, we are now the protection team of La Rosada. We need to protect our families and friends. These are good people. We have to keep them safe. Before, our sisters and mothers were helped by the others when Los Diablos caused trouble. Chewie and I helped beat them back. Now we come together again to defend ourselves and drive out the evil ones for good." The group of 48 men cheered loudly, raising their fists in the air. Tim let out a loud rebel yell, and Nate joined in, echoing with 47 more cheers. When the noise died down, Joe asked who could come back tomorrow at 6 p.m. for a practice run. Another round of cheers filled the air. Tim felt a rush of energy and excitement. He walked quickly to the tools shed as someone yelled, "Brothers, let's raise a toast and celebrate." Tim thought of the lovely woman waiting for him and remembered how wonderful it felt to dance with her. Sure, he wanted a beer, but it was really her he thought about. The beautiful women let out cheers of their own when they saw their men return. There were happy hugs all around. The DJ started playing music again, a mix of polkas and salsas. The crowd was buzzing with excitement. Sombreros were few and the dresses were pretty short, which meant the women showed off their legs more as they danced. Tim was surprised that Jeannie knew the dance, but not shocked. At the big party, Benita got the loudest cheers when it was her turn to dance. Her blonde hair flew around as she moved, and her dancing brought cheers from the crowd. She was in her own world, not worrying about the crowd. Later, she told Tim she had a lot of experience with dancing in front of big audiences. She danced just for him. The DJ paused the music so everyone could catch their breath, then announced it was late, and it would be the last song. Tim held Jeannie close while they listened to a romantic song, translating the words for her. She snuggled closer, enjoying the moment. When the song ended, she looked at him with dreamy eyes and whispered, "I want you." He kissed her forehead and held her tight as others came by to say goodbye. Tim made sure everyone knew the credit belonged to Daniel and Dora for hosting. Once the crowd thinned out, he called Jim Boyd to say they would be ready after tomorrow night. "Any last thoughts or news?" Boyd replied they found the leaks because they had proof now. "What day works for you?" "We'll practice in the dark tomorrow. Any time after that is good. The sooner the better. My team is ready to end this." Once in Joe's truck, he said to Jeannie, "Tim should share more about his life before this gets serious. Karen probably didn't know about your training or other adventures, right? You should know who you're with." Tim agreed. "I'll share everything tonight or tomorrow, whatever you prefer." "I'll be with Chewie and Imelda tonight," Joe said. "We need to get up early and prepare for the event. You two are on your own until tomorrow evening." Joe kissed Jeannie goodbye and drove off. "What was that about?" she asked, looking puzzled. Tim explained that Joe, Chewie, Daniel, and their wives talked about him. Joe wanted him to be honest about things that might worry her. "When do you want me to do that?" Jeannie asked, watching him closely. He could see her frown change to a smile. "We have until tomorrow evening. Let's have a serious talk then, over coffee. The dance was a lot of fun, and I have other plans for tonight." She could sense Tim's mix of feelings. While he clearly liked her, they were both still married, though to people who didn't respect them. But a lawyer once said that a broken contract is no longer a contract. As soon as she brought him into the dark house, she turned to face him, pressed her body against him, and pulled his head down to kiss him. She wanted him to feel her affection for him. Tim hesitated, but she could sense his struggle. They broke the agreement, not us. If one side breaks it, then it is broken for both. I know my dad worries about your past, but I don't care if you did bad things before we met. I see who you are now, and I love that person. We will see what tomorrow brings," Tim said softly into her hair. "Tonight, I'll show you how I truly feel. If by tomorrow you don't want to be with me anymore, that is up to you, and I will respect your choice. Honey, I know more than you think." The women weren't just waiting while you had your serious talk. They were discussing the upcoming event, what happened before, and how you saved some of them from terrible things. I might seem naive, but I know more about my dad than he thinks. And I know more about you than you realize. Her eyes searched his. Her voice took on a deeper tone, and she challenged him. "I'm going to surprise you tonight, Tim. Do you think you're ready for it?" They were both filled with a feeling of deep love and happiness. By mid-morning, they were ready for coffee and food. "Should we have breakfast or go straight to lunch?" Tim asked. She checked the clock and thought lunch would be better. Tim went to his truck and brought back the half brisket Daniel had put in his cooler this morning. Daniel hadn't said anything, but Tim had seen him put it in the cooler along with some cut-up lettuce, tomatoes, and salsa. Flour tortillas were lying on the truck's tailgate in the warm sun, so they had everything for brisket tacos. The tacos and coffee were just what they needed, lifting their spirits. After cleaning up the table, Tim poured fresh coffee for both of them and invited her to sit with him at the glass table on the porch. Once they were both seated, he asked, "Do you want to hear my life story, or would you rather ask me questions?" Jeannie looked into his eyes and said clearly, "You are the kindest man I know, protective of your friends and family, and everyone loves you for that. But when your family or friends are in danger, you can be very tough, unforgiving, and dangerous. You can be the best friend and the worst enemy." "That's what others say. Is there more?" Tim asked. "What details?" Jeannie replied, "That sums it up, but it doesn't show the whole picture. Tough doesn't really explain when you hurt someone who was hurting others. It doesn't tell of the place where the bad people were celebrating and how it went up in flames when it was attacked. You don't hear the gunfire as they run from the fire, scared and shooting without aiming. You don't see the plea of those who survived, realizing telling what they know might not save them. Tough, unforgiving, and dangerous are good words, but they don't fully explain what you've done. So, Jeannie, if you want the whole story, I'll tell you. I respect you enough to share everything. You should know what you're getting into if you choose to stay with me after what happens. I understand if you hear all of this or see me act and decide you want to leave. I will accept that, even if it hurts. If someone hurts me or faces my loved ones, I can become cold inside. My blood runs hot, but my heart feels nothing. I can be heartless when needed. My dad thinks it's because of my mixed heritage. I'm not sure about that, but from what I've read, I am like my ancestors, fighters with no mercy. I never told Karen because I didn't want to scare her. I didn't want her to see the monster I could become. Sadly, you have been warned and will likely see that side of me soon. Hiding it from you isn't possible like I did with Karen. Your dad knows, and he understands because he has faced it too. It worries him, but he accepts it. He knows he and your mom have had a good life despite the past. We may not be so lucky, but we do have a role model. Regardless, I will cherish every moment with you, even if it's just for a day or two. I will love you from a distance if that's what it comes to." Jeannie kept looking into his eyes as he spoke. She reached out, touched his cheek, and said, "I see your true self, Timothy. I'm ready to fight for you, and I trust you to always care for me, our family, and our friends. I won't back away from the fight or from loving you. We are together now, and that won't change." Mom shared stories about Dad's time in the Army and how he did things he wasn't proud of during the war. But it was war. What you did to rescue those girls who were taken and hurt was also part of that fight. When they come onto your land wanting to hurt you, take me away and sell me, that's a kind of war too. You must do whatever it takes to stop this. I have a question for you, Tim. Am I strong enough for you? That worries me. I should have stood up to Larry a long time ago. I should have told him to leave me alone when he threatened me while we were engaged, just because I was talking to one of his friends. I should have told him to stop when we got married, and he kept me from seeing my family. I should have been stronger. When he hit me and blamed me, I should have called the police. I was too weak, I guess. But I promise, if he tries to take me again, I will fight back. Maybe that makes me bad, too. I don't know, but I find strength in you, and I hope I'm not taking away from you. Tim smiled and gestured for her to sit with him on the couch. When she got closer, he lifted her onto his lap. "Wow! Can you two ever get enough?" Nate joked. "This is fun to watch, but come on, stop." Jeannie felt her face turn red when Nate caught them. She turned and said, "Your timing is really off, Nate." Tim looked up and said, "Joe told us we had until 3. You're 3 hours too early. That was before we got the call that they are on their way this afternoon and will be here around dark. We still have a few things to do, so let her go, get it together, and let's get to work," Nate said with a laugh as he shook his head. "Gosh," he said before walking to his truck. Tim quickly put on jeans and boots. Jeannie left on her cute dress but added socks and boots when they climbed into the truck. Jeannie walked to the back door, but Tim winked and said, "Come sit with us. You won't distract Nate." They were getting closer to the barn and saw at least a dozen cars already there. Nate parked by the barn, and they greeted the people who had gathered, waiting for the troublemakers to arrive. Tim said to the group with a laugh, "It's good to see the leaders ready to take them on." He then asked for an update on things. "We kinda slept in this morning, so fill me in." Everyone laughed so hard it made him pause. He pretended to look confused. "What? I didn't say anything funny," he said with an exaggerated sigh. The laughter got louder, and Jeannie felt her cheeks flush when everyone looked at her. "Sleeping in isn't what everyone else is trying to do here," someone joked. Daniel said, "I think you didn't sleep at all last night. Maybe the loud coyotes or wild cats kept you awake." Jeannie turned bright red and hid her face against Tim's back, avoiding her dad's eyes and those of people she didn't know well. Tim tried to hold in his laughter, but when he saw Joe laughing too, he finally said, "Yeah, I heard a cat crying at night, but Jeannie kept falling asleep, so she probably didn't hear it." She pinched him on the back and buried her face in his shirt as the laughter started to quiet down. She then stepped around him and faced everyone. "Okay, you all are being mean to me. Just because I'm from the city and don't know much about the wild animals here doesn't mean you can tease me." They laughed again, and Jeannie continued, "Some of you even warned me last night. I had no experience with those creatures, so yeah, maybe I screamed a little." Even her dad started laughing harder, but she pushed on. "Maybe being scared runs in the family. I certainly heard my mom scream a lot when I was growing up," she said while narrowing her eyes at her dad, who laughed even harder. "So maybe you folks should let me keep some of my—" When it stopped, she playfully hit Tim on his chest and said, "This is all your fault." Tim grinned back and said, "Guilty as charged, but you sure get scared easily." She hit him again while giving him a silly lovesick grin and laid her head on his chest. Then Linda and 3 other women came to Jeannie's side, saying they should go with her away from these teasing men. They walked toward the house. The men watched them go. One shouted, "There go the wild ladies!" and the 4 linked arms, walking with a lot of silly wiggles. The men laughed, but then became serious. "Gentlemen, I apologize for involving you in this. Maybe you should head home to your families. We can manage this without any of you getting hurt." "Like you did when my wife and his sister were taken?" Pablo asked, pointing at one of them. "That wasn't your problem, but you made it yours. We are all in this together. There isn't anyone in this county who will just stand by while you face a group of thugs." "I'm offended that my brother would even suggest that." All the men there agreed. Tim nodded with watery eyes and said he was sorry for what he did. "I'm sorry, it's my fault." Chewy gave him a friendly pat on the back. "It's okay, brother." Tim cleared his throat and went into the tack room. He lifted a big saddle stand, which had a hidden lock, and opened a trap door. He walked down a short set of stairs and opened a thick door with a combination lock. Joe, Daniel, Chewy, and Nate began passing up weapons to the others, who stacked them neatly. Each stack had 2 sniper rifles with night scopes, 3 shotguns ready to shoot, and 6 assault rifles with a lot of bullets. They added a grenade launcher and a missile launcher last. When Tim came back up after closing everything, he saw his squad leaders looking shocked. "Wow, Tim, where did you get all this stuff?" Nate asked. "I've been bringing it from town over the last year," Tim replied. "Daniel knows how to get it, and it's always there when needed." Deputy Sheriff Jesse asked, "But how illegal is this stuff?" Tim looked back at him and said, "Let's keep it simple. After the fight, we need to clean up and put everything back in the vault. It's best not to use the big guns unless we really have to." Jesse nodded, looking thoughtful. "We might have to bury more than we planned. I heard 3 van loads are coming." Tim assured him, "Don't worry, I dug an extra pit." But Jesse corrected him. "It's 3 vans, maybe 9 or 10 in each." Daniel shrugged. "We have room for everything, even the vans." "Leroy, step up," Tim said. "I need to install the phone and speaker. I got here early and fixed some lines. Now I just need to connect everything." Tim looked at the others. "Start setting your things up before the others arrive. If you have questions, ask Joe, Nate, Chewy, or Daniel. I'll get Jeannie and take care of the house with Leroy." Tim borrowed Nate's truck and went to get Jeannie. He explained why he needed her, and she hurried out, all excited. They took Leroy to the house with Jeannie close to Tim. Leroy set up 2 phone jacks and tested everything. "It's all good. I'll head back to town to finish some papers and bring back most of the group at 5, he said. As Tim drove off, Jeannie hugged him and asked, "Do we have time for a quick moment together?" Tim, feeling overwhelmed, thought about how complex things had gotten. They had just been resting when Linda knocked and walked in. "Oh, you're all covered up. I'm disappointed," she said with a grin. "Can you two go again? It sounds exciting." Nate chuckled, supporting her. Tim, not amused, said, "Get out of our room." Linda teased back, "But your dad will be here soon. He may not want to see or hear you two." Jeannie, suddenly realizing she was half-dressed, screamed and told them to leave so she could change. They left, laughing. Jeannie stomped out of the bathroom and saw her dad. She was now dressed nicely but slightly blushing. "Why are you showering in the middle of the day?" she asked Linda with a smirk. "I felt sweaty," Linda replied. Nate added with a grin, "Sounds like you had fun." Joe joked, "Should I call you Wild Kitten?" Jeannie frowned, annoyed. "Even Dad is making fun of me now." Linda said, "I'm just saying it sounds like a lot of fun." They all laughed together. Jeannie waved at Tim to move his chair back. Then she sat down on his lap. She gave him a quick kiss and turned to Linda, giving her a wink. "Let me just say, I've never had so much fun. Being with Tim is really something special," she said. Her dad covered his ears playfully. Tim smiled wide with pride. Nate chuckled and Linda winked back, saying, "I can't speak to that, but Tim's brother certainly knows how to keep things lively." It seems that fun runs in the family. Everyone was laughing and chatting until the new phone rang. After a short call, Tim looked serious and said, "Well, I guess we can't put this off any longer. A truck carrying Rogers' slaughter barns left Lake Travis at noon. We don't know the exact path they're taking, but since they didn't go east, they'll probably head down 281 or use some back roads." He continued, "They plan to meet in San Antonio with a van from Del Rio and another from Seguin. We should expect them to arrive in our county around 5 p.m. I doubt they'll come straight here, but we need to spread the word so we can be ready if they get here while it's still light." "I don't think that will happen. They will probably wait until it's dark, maybe closer to 8. We still have quite a bit to do," Tim added. "Nate, should we call or are we fine?" "Let's make the call to be sure, but we're good either way," Nate answered. Jeannie, Joe, and Linda went to Mendez's house to inform the others already there. Meanwhile, Tim and Nate went to the oil storage tanks on the hill. They hooked up a hose, laid it down to the creek, and connected it. All that was left was to open the valve and turn on the pump. They checked their stations to make sure everything was ready and made sure the generators for the lights were working. Everything looked good, so they drove to the shed. When they arrived, the sheriff drove in just before them. He greeted them as the Kelly boys and then walked over to a group of men sitting on hay bales and benches. The sheriff had a canvas bag that he placed on a table. He greeted each man and then casually addressed the group. "It's nice to see Jose and Jesse enjoying their time off. I heard you guys are going wild hog hunting tonight and maybe fishing tomorrow after you process the pigs. Sounds like fun. I wish I could join you, but my job keeps me busy." He turned to Tim and said, "You're even more alone out here than usual. Your neighbors went to town for a couple of days." He paused. "We heard today that a group of 5 criminals from Austin, wanted for serious crimes, have teamed up with another gang. They call themselves Los Angeles Del Diablo. They've been a problem in our area before, and now they're back, planning to cause trouble in the Del Rio area. They are known for smuggling drugs and people, and they are rumored to have plans to hunt down a man and kidnap a woman in our county. This man is said to lead another gang they don't get along with. The woman is related to one of the criminals. They believe if they succeed, they can take over more areas and make their smuggling easier." The sheriff continued, "We are keeping an eye out and have placed extra patrols around. We're also moving some people to town until things settle down. Since your neighbors are already in town, it just leaves you guys here." He looked at the 5 women nearby. "I know most of you have homes in town. If you want to be safe, you can go there." No one moved, so he added, "I didn't think you would. That's why I brought some new handheld radios. You can use these to talk to each other if you see anything unusual. I set them to a special frequency that no one else uses. If you need to reach us, one of the deputies will help you." He scanned the group and joked, "Make sure your fun doesn't get out of hand. People can get careless and get hurt. It's good that some nurses are here just in case." He tipped his hat to the women and said, "I need to get back to work. Take care and keep an eye out." As he got in his Bronco, he added with a grin, "Part of me wishes those criminals would show up. I've heard some wild stories, and I bet they'd be interested in our town. Just be careful, and remember to duck if a shot comes flying your way." By 5 o'clock, the table was full of ingredients for soft tacos, and the coolers were stocked with drinks. There were 48 men in the crowd and about a dozen women nearby. They ate and talked together. They went over their plans and then split into 6 groups to discuss their jobs. The women set up 6 cots and opened 2 boxes of medical supplies. At 6 o'clock, half the group went south to an area called Lab Reseda, while the other half took trucks to the north side. Tim, Jeannie, and Joe drove a power wagon to the gate where a small bulldozer was parked. A big sign at the gate said no trespassing. It warned that anyone who came in would be punished, and armed invaders could be killed. Next to the sign was a new banner in English and Spanish asking if you believed in heaven or hell. It warned that if you crossed the sign, you would know for sure. Tim could see the tops of the light towers, but they would be hidden if someone entered at night. When they reached a small creek before the hill where the ranch house was, they saw a mix of water and crude oil slowly flowing downstream toward the earthen dam. The dam held water all the way to the northern edge of the property. The road was built high with a pipe 5 feet wide running underneath it. "It's all set," Joe said. "We've planned and prepared well. We're ready for anything when the action starts. You know the saying, men plan and gods laugh, right? That's why we've run different practice drills. We're sure we can stick to plan A, but we need to be ready to change if needed." Tim responded, "Our first job is to protect Jeannie, then our men, and then ourselves. You two should change into clothes you don't mind losing if it comes to that." Tim nodded. Jeannie squeezed his arm and frowned. Waiting was tough, but their radios helped sort out last-minute questions. As night fell, countless stars appeared in the dark sky. The sky in South Texas at night looked like what early explorers saw, clear and with little humidity, offering a view of stars and the Milky Way that most people have never seen. The sky in West Texas was amazing for stargazing, but the brush country wasn't far behind. Tim, Joe, and Jeannie sat in wooden chairs around the fire pit, discussing the stars and shapes in the sky. They didn't light a fire to keep their eyes sharp, but they enjoyed the cool weather and the starry night. Suddenly, the radio crackled with a warning. The sheriff's department had spotted 4 vehicles on the nearby road about 15 minutes away. Everyone was ready, and everything was set. They offered a prayer and talked, feeling their hearts racing. They saw headlights on the county road, watching as they turned into the ranch entrance. The vehicles lingered at the entrance, cutting a chain and chatting, then drove on, disappearing into the creek area. Joe grabbed his rifle and 2 spare magazines, moving to his spot behind a dirt mound south of the house. He had a good view of anyone coming from the east. The ranch entrance road from the west was not a likely way in, as it meant walking 3 miles through the brush. Tim and Jeannie went inside and turned on the lights. Tim grabbed the microphone and activated the outdoor speakers. With a strong voice, he repeated the warning from the gate in Spanish. After a moment, he said it in English. Jeannie started the tape, and ominous music filled the air. The outsiders would not understand the message, but the locals would know what it meant. No mercy. The music kept playing, like the calls from the Alamo, but the night began to change. A fire lit up the creek where Daniel and Chewy had set crude oil ablaze. The light towers that marked the intruder's path turned on, flooding the area with light. Some intruders fired at the light towers, and in response, nearby battle stations opened fire. One vehicle exploded, blocking any escape. Some attackers fell as bullets hit them. Others ran toward the house on the hill, but were met with strong gunfire from other stations north and west. Some tried to back away, but the fire from the first stations was closing in on them. They were forced deeper into the trap, which had become the killing zone. More attackers fell as the shooting from both sides grew heavier. 3 made it past the last stations and rushed toward the house, shooting at the figures they could see through the windows. A single shot was heard, and 1 fell. The other 2 kept running and shooting at the house. They got into the fenced area without any resistance. 1 ran to the front door while the other moved around the north side toward the back. Larry Barnes burst through the front door and saw Jeannie standing in the room across from him. His rifle was aimed at her as he moved closer. "You worthless piece of trash!" "I'm going to hurt you badly and then sell you in Mexico," he shouted. Jeannie responded, "I know you won't. You're going straight to hell." He paused when she revealed an automatic shotgun hidden behind the bedroom wall. He raised his rifle, but Jeannie fired quickly. A big bloody hole opened up in the room. Larry fell to the ground beside it. Pain and shock filled his face as he lay there, trying to keep his insides from spilling out. Just then, the back door opened with a bang. JW rushed in, looking for a target. Larry jumped into the room and quickly turned to his right. A machete came from behind the door and cut into his arm. He cried out and dropped the weapon. Tim stepped in, swinging the bloody machete. He hit JW in the face, knocking him onto the table. JW lay there, stunned, blood running down his face. The weapon fell to the floor, and Tim kicked it under the table. He slashed Larry's other arm and then rested the sharp blade against his belt. Looking into Larry's frightened eyes, he said, "You did all this. You had to charm every woman you met, whether they were married or not. For the ones you couldn't charm, you drugged them and boasted about it. You recorded your actions to blackmail them and show your friends. You invited the worst people to join in. You found a gang foolish enough to pay for those awful videos and to buy the women when you were done with them. You are to blame for what has happened to your friends tonight, and now for what will happen to you." Tim dropped the machete down quickly, cutting into Larry's pants. Larry screamed, begging for mercy. Tim looked at him coldly. "You don't get to be shown mercy like you showed Jeannie, Dana, Carla, and Jennifer. None at all. You will cry and shout for help, but I will keep you alive for as long as I can. I want you to enter hell, wearing a mask of pain so everyone can see what you are." He sliced into Larry's thigh. Blood poured out. "Don't get too worked up. It hurts now, but in an hour it will be the least of your worries." As he pushed the machete into Larry's leg, he asked, "What made you think it was a good idea to hurt my wife? Didn't you hear the stories about who I am? If I had known you were behind it, I would have stayed far away." Once Tim learned the truth, it was too late. They had to stop Larry before he could hurt them. Tim looked at Jeannie, who was watching with her shotgun aimed at Larry. He weakly stared at her stone-cold face, begging for mercy. She replied, "What mercy did you show me when you hurt me? Last time you gave me a concussion, broke my eye socket, and hurt my ribs. Did you get me help then? Well, Larry, now you know how I felt. No one will come for you. Just like Tim saved me, no one will help you. You will die here, and your body will be buried far away. You will suffer in hell forever. Jeannie, go outside and call your dad. We need to check on him and the others." She stepped outside and made the call. Then she heard another scream from Larry, who now had a deep cut on his right cheek, blood flowing down. Joe hugged Jeannie and told her to stay outside and calm down. He went back inside and heard another terrible scream. Larry's pants were sliced and blood poured out. Joe spoke to Tim and gently took hold of his arm with the machete. "We need answers from Larry, and he can give them to us. Let me talk to him for a moment. Jeannie just shot her husband, and she needs you." Tim nodded and stepped outside to comfort Jeannie. Joe was talking to Larry, saying they needed answers, but they would let Tim take over again if Larry refused to cooperate. Just then, Nate's truck arrived. He, Daniel, Chewy, Jesse, and Jose climbed out. Chivo got out of the back, saying, "We found another one hiding in the bushes, but he smells terrible." Tim glanced over and saw Barry tightly tied up. He turned to Chivo and said, "Take him to the spot where we clean deer. We'll wash him off, cut his clothes, and then start asking questions. Joe is talking to JW, but I might have hurt him too much. We'll let Chivo handle this one. He's better with a knife than I am." Tim turned to Chewy and Daniel. "Are you all okay?" They smiled, and Chewy said, "Just some scratches on our side. The enemy lost almost everyone except for this guy and 3 others, but they are wounded." "What happened here? We didn't want to let those 3 go, but you insisted. It seems that you, Jeannie, and Joe are all okay." Jeannie stepped up beside him, wrapped her arm around him, and said, "We're fine. Larry was shot and is dying, and Rogers wishes he could die too. My shotgun nearly tore Larry apart, and Tim used his machete on Rogers." Chewy, Daniel, and Nate looked closely at Jeannie and Tim. Jeannie didn't blink or change her face as she continued. "I know you're all worried about me, but I'm okay. We tried to do the right thing. I reported Karen for hurting me. Tim took her to court to gain custody of their kids. We showed our cases, and the court agreed. Then Karen planned with 7 men to kill Tim and take their boys. Tonight, everything came to a head. Out here. My only question is, what now? Now we clean up the mess, Jesse shouted as he approached them. The cleaning crew is on their way. I will supervise them. One group is loading the pieces of the broken pickup onto a trailer with a front loader. Another group is loading bodies onto another trailer, while others gather the weapons and shells we can find. The shells and weapons will be buried with the bodies and the pickup. We'll decide what to do with the vans after I speak with Tim. What about the man you have hanging up? We will find out everything we can. If he tells us what we need to know, we'll decide what happens next. If not, he'll join the others in an hour or two after he stops suffering, Tim replied. 2 sets of vehicle lights came up the road, and 4 women got out of each vehicle. The cleanup crew rushed inside with supplies while 2 nurses checked on him and Jeannie, and then went to see Joe. Moments later, Joe called for help. Chewie and Daniel dragged Rogers outside, and he was crying. He had many cuts and stab wounds in addition to the big ones Tim had given him. Joe said coldly, "I don't think he knows anything more." "All right, Tim, he's your problem now." Tim grabbed Rogers by his curly black hair, the hair he used to love, and started dragging him to the hoist. Rogers screamed and squirmed but couldn't fight back. Daniel and Chewie lifted him off the ground. Rogers screamed even louder. They dropped him in front of the hoist where Chivo had hung another guy and cut off his clothes. Chivo shined a light on Rogers. "See that fat man? That's how you will look in 15 minutes unless you share everything you know. The names of everyone involved and what they did." Tim felt satisfaction seeing the fear on Rogers' face. "Take your time with him, but make sure he tells us everything. I haven't decided whether to kill them or to hurt them and sell them as cat food to places in Southeast Asia or South America. So keep them alive if you can. However, if they don't cooperate, kill them as painfully as possible and we will figure out what's next." 2 hours later, the house was clean, but it smelled like bleach. Jenny and Tim had bloodstains on them, so they took showers, changed, and tossed their old clothes into the fire. The pieces of the pickup and all the bodies were gone. Roger and Benton didn't survive the interrogation, but both shared all the details they could for the recorder. Ranger Boyd would want to know the names of those involved. The 2 deputies talked to someone, and soon after, all 3 vans left the area with the surviving members. Jenny and Tim stayed outside and out of the way while the crews worked. Everyone except Joe had left. The 3 of them made a small fire and sat around it. They didn't say much, but the silence felt good. By midnight, the fire had burned down, and so had their energy. They each went to bed, surprised at how quickly they fell asleep. Dear listeners, the last part will be ready in a few hours. Hey listeners, if you enjoyed watching this video and want to stay updated with our latest content, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss out on what's coming next. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video with Queen Cheating Tales. Leaving them behind in the park, I felt a cold satisfaction. They thought they could deceive me, but they were wrong. The evidence was clear, their guilt undeniable. This was my justice, my way of reclaiming control. As I walked away, the storm raged on, mirroring the chaos within my soul. The end was near.